It was literally my first night ever stealth camping alone. I was 19 years old and had just left my home in northern Illinois, planning to circle Lake Erie by bike. As evening neared, I found myself riding along a gravel path through farmland, passing through small towns every now and then. I began searching for a spot to set up my tent, though I wasn't exactly sure what a good stealth camping place looked like. Traveling by bicycle, I carried very light gear, just enough to last between towns. I had a tiny one-person tent, a tarp, some food and water for the night and morning, a flashlight, and a few basics. There were many small communities scattered around the area, so I could restock supplies about twice a day. Since I couldn't carry a cooler, I avoided some of the heavier loads I saw other cyclists and backpackers carrying. Some had up to 60 pounds strapped to their backs. As a newcomer, I was kind of amazed by how everyone managed out there. Eventually, I spotted a possible campsite. To my left, the bike trail ran alongside a narrow state road with a small grassy path crossing it. To my right, there was a clearing in the woods where about 8 big semi-trailers sat parked on the grass. The trailers were covered in tall weeds and looked like they hadn't moved in years, but the paths between them were kept clear. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I guessed maybe someone was working on the trucks and needed access to the cabins. For some reason, I didn't think anything suspicious was going on. I found a spot blocked from view in almost every direction by the trailers and started setting up my camp. I didn't bother with the tent. I just unrolled my sleeping bag and built a small fire pit to keep bugs away. As the sun quickly disappeared, I ate a simple dinner. I don't even recall exactly what it was, and took in the surroundings. It looked like it might have been a storage area for some kind of construction company, not only housing old building materials but also these blown-out semis. Trees stretched about 100 feet beyond the clearing, and past those, I could see flickering lights from a nearby town, much closer than I expected, maybe just a mile or two away. After dark, I turned on my small but bright electric lanterns, which helped me enjoy the area a little longer. I knew as soon as I switched them off, I'd fall asleep quickly. That's just how it goes being out on the road. There's something deeply human about being outside under the stars, shutting out the rest of the world once the sun sets. I let the fire burn down so I wouldn't have to keep it up all night. That way, I could just ditch it in the morning. The fire slowly died out, and after an hour, I was ready for bed. It's worth mentioning that the whole situation gave me the creeps, but in a sort of fun way. Like I said, the trailers were strange, but I didn't feel threatened. The dark settled over my camp like a heavy blanket, almost suffocating. I think part of it was the towering trailers around me, stretching so high they disappeared into the night sky. I felt small and incredibly alone down there. It wasn't my first night camping, but it was definitely the first time I started to miss home. Regret and worry began creeping in just as I was starting to drift off. Then, just minutes after falling asleep, I heard something that completely changed the mood. There was a squeak of an old hinge, followed by a loud bang. I waited, then heard footsteps climbing down a cab ladder and padding on the grass below. I can't describe how terrified I became. My arms and legs froze up. My body refused to breathe. Every part of me wanted to scream, but my lungs felt empty. Thank goodness the man coughed and cleared his throat, then spat the nastiest gob of phlegm I've ever heard. He took a few more steps. He was 2 trailers away, maybe 30 feet from me, and then stopped, unzipped his pants, and started to urinate. I saw the stream shining in the moonlight, and after almost a minute, I watched him soak his own boots with his pee. That moment filled me with pure terror. I knew this guy was unhinged, totally deranged. I know it sounds weird, but that little detail told me all I needed to know about who he was. He wandered around the edge of the trailer and headed toward the woods outside town. Clicked, he was probably homeless or something like that, out there doing whatever he needed to survive. Begging, looking for drugs or food, whatever his lifestyle was. I listened for a while, but didn't hear anything else. I realized it was time for me to leave. That whole experience freaked me out, so I packed up quickly under my headlamp, loaded my bike, and hit the trail. A mile or 2 down the road, I found a much better camping spot, though I didn't sleep well that night. I rode until I was right outside of town and set up a small stealth camp behind the first gas station I saw. Think it was a Shell station. The parking lot lights glowed nearby, I didn't get much sleep, but I felt safe. I never saw that guy again, and I'm glad he never found me. Honestly, I don't know how he didn't. I wasn't quiet when I made camp. I had a fire and lanterns burning between the trailers. He must have known I was there. Maybe he wanted me to scare off. If he didn't know I was there, my only guess is he was a junkie who passed out in the back of one of the semis. Whatever the case, I'm really thankful I never had to meet him. If you don't mind, I have another story that comes to mind. A couple years later, I started what would probably become a 7-month, 5,300-mile bike tour through the western US, mostly stealth camping along the way. One thing about traveling like this is that the forest is far from quiet at night. During the first weeks, I learned to find comfort in the endless buzzing of crickets and croaking of toads. Sometimes I camped near babbling streams. That was always the highlight of my night. It wasn't unusual to hear the howls of a distant pack of coyotes. I even remember one night camping between 2 owls that hooted back and forth for hours. About 6 weeks into the trip, I was somewhere in the rural mountains of western Montana. For those who don't know, parts of Montana are among the most remote you can get in the lower 48 states. But that night, I was hidden in some trees just outside a small town. After turning off my light and lying down, I realized something disturbing. There was no cricket chirping, no toad croaking, no coyote calls, not even owls. The stillness was complete. Even the dry autumn leaves on the trees didn't stir. It was a total silence that felt almost loud, like the whole forest was holding its breath, hiding from some unseen predator. The occasional snap of a twig echoed like a gunshot, instantly waking me fully. Then, from the meadow, a huge silhouette appeared. A grizzly bear lumbering toward me, sniffing and scraping at the ground. The crazy part was I was only about a quarter mile from town, and the faint sounds of passing cars drifted through the night. The bear ignored everything. It was about 50 feet away but massive, swaying as it moved. It glanced at me, sniffed again, then just kept on going. The next morning, I learned that Bear was a local troublemaker who regularly wandered into town to raid dumpsters. When I rode into town, trash was scattered everywhere, and people were grumbling as they cleaned up the mess. I couldn't help but laugh. No wonder the bear didn't bother with me. It had a full buffet just down the road. The townsfolk themselves were actually scarier than the bear. Many had seen my little camp outside town. It wasn't very stealthy, and they mostly gave me cold looks, doing their best to push me toward the next town. For the rest of that trip, I camped through freezing nights, which made stealth camping in or near towns a must. If something bad happened, and I was too far from help, there was no way I could have made it in the freezing cold. The scary moments weren't the end of my troubles, though. One night, I had a hostile bunkmate in a hostel who talked in his sleep. Another guy in the bed next to me loudly snored. This might sound normal, but these two men were strangers to me, and to each other. I couldn't just shake one awake and hope for the best. I pictured them waking up confused and attacking me. The bunkmate above me would go from mumbling nonsense to repeating a girl's name over and over, then apologizing, then describing violent acts like smashing someone's head with a mailbox post. It was some of the creepiest, strangest stuff I've ever heard. Honestly, at that moment, I would have preferred the grizzly bear wandering around my camp again. The wildest part was that in the morning, the guy was the happiest, most cheerful person you could imagine. You'd never guess he'd been talking in these violent nightmares. After that, I stopped bunking with strangers. I saw a lot of strange things on the edges of towns where I spent many sleepless nights. You could say I'm a thrill seeker because I keep doing this. I have a road trip story, but it's really strange because it wasn't a trip I even wanted to take at the time. Me and the girl I was seeing were in a bad place. By that, I mean we were fighting nonstop and cheating on each other. It was super toxic stuff made worse by way too much drinking. You probably get the idea. After enough arguments and explosions, I finally decided to leave. My problem was I didn't have any local places to stay. We had moved to a city and then split up after only 6 months. I hadn't really made any solid friends or connections who would let me crash on their couch. So, I had just one choice after I made that call: pack all my stuff in the back of my old car and start the long drive back home. It was a 19-hour trip I planned to break up over 2 days. I'd been driving for what felt like forever. The endless highway stretched out like a nightmare that wouldn't end. After 8 hours, I started to feel trapped in some kind of car purgatory. The sun had long gone down, casting a sickly yellowish light over the empty land around me. I began to wonder if I'd ever find a place to sleep. Maybe breaking up the drive wasn't such a great idea. I wasn't really familiar with the area between home and the city I was leaving, which, if you want to know, was Louisville, but that detail doesn't really matter here. It was the middle of the night, and I was almost lost. The GPS had sent me down a twisting road where trees closed in on both sides like silent guards. I got a shiver down my spine realizing I was totally alone out there. No cars had passed me in hours, and I hadn't seen another person since I stopped for gas at a station miles back. The road was still paved, thankfully, but it was a narrow 2-lane route with signs spaced far apart. Felt way too rough to be a main road, but by then I was committed. Plus, for some reason, I trusted the GPS flickering on my dashboard. As I kept driving, the quiet started to bother me. I turned on the radio, but all I got was static and white noise. I tried focusing on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to the weird feeling that someone was watching me. This was probably because I was coming down from drugs. My ex and I were definitely heavy drinkers, but since moving to Louisville, we had tried some drugs we found near the bar district. Now that the effects were fading, I felt nervous and strange, sweat dripping down my forehead. I'd only been on this trip a few hours, but I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The miles blurred together in a haze of tiredness and boredom. I'd seen nothing but fields and woods for hours. I started wondering if I'd ever see civilization again, which was important to me. Even ignoring my paranoia, I wasn't brave enough to pull over and camp out in the middle of nowhere. I wanted to find a place with streetlights, like a park or maybe a Walmart in the next town. As the darkness grew deeper, a creeping dread came over me. I was alone, vulnerable, and totally at the mercy of the road. I pushed the thought away and focused on the GPS, hoping it would lead me to safety. Finally, after what seemed like forever, I saw a worn-out sign saying the next town was only 30 miles ahead. The problem was, I was seriously exhausted. So tired I was almost nodding off at the wheel, almost driving off the road. Because of that tiredness, I started getting emotional. Part of me wanted to cry as my mind filled with thoughts of what I was actually doing. Forced to flee across the country because my girlfriend left me. The heartbreak was taking over. All I wanted now was some sleep. I looked out the passenger window and saw exactly what I needed. A small cluster of rooftops way out in the forest. I was close enough now that the small outlying neighborhoods were starting to appear. I decided to go for it. There was no way I could drive another 30 miles. People meant safety, so I took the exit off the main road, my tires crunching on gravel as I moved toward a little clearing. A lone tree stand stood nearby, its branches like bony fingers reaching for the moon. The quiet hum of my engine was the only sound in the still night. I was just glad for the moonlight and some space away from houses. The last thing I wanted was to bother anyone and have the cops called on me. I turned off my headlights and drove by moonlight so no one would see me coming. In my little sedan, I could pull off the road behind some grass and catch some rest until morning. As I pulled near the tree stand, I noticed a small cabin slumped beside it. Its windows were empty, and the door hung crookedly on broken hinges, like it was crying out in protest. I shivered, feeling a chill run down my back. I stopped the car and stared at it for a while. I wasn't expecting a building so close to the tree line, but there it was. The longer I looked, the more I knew it was definitely abandoned. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should keep driving, but the thought of another hour on the road was too much. I pulled up closer to the cabin, my heart pounding, and cut the engine. The silence felt heavy and thick with unknown danger. My head was foggy from all the stuff I was dealing with, basically homeless, miserable, and trying to find the safest place to sleep in the woods. I wasn't prepared for this kind of trip, but it was only for one night, so I'd do my best. I sat a moment, gathering courage. The cabin seemed to loom over me, its empty windows like cold, dead eyes watching. I knew I had to get out to stretch my legs and clear my head. But as I opened the door and stepped outside into the dark, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something bad. Sure, any normal person would have just slept in their car. But I'm tall, 6 feet 5 inches, and my car was packed with all my stuff from Louisville. There was no room to stretch out or relax in my car, so I had to sleep outside. Luckily, I packed my small hammock, the kind you can hang almost anywhere. I tied it to a tree on a hill above the cabin so I'd have a view of the area. Then I started setting it up with my bedding, a battery pack, water, and all the little things I might need overnight. I ate a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and tried to relax. Food helped calm my nerves. I remember shaking as I climbed into that hammock, licking my fingers clean, and gathering the courage to turn off my flashlight. I accepted the darkness and enjoyed the twinkling stars above as I settled in for the night, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Then I started hearing strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees, but then I heard it again, the sound of raccoons chattering and scampering through the brush. We had plenty of raccoons back in my hometown. They'd come out of everywhere, from sheds and garbage cans, even doggy doors. I grew up around them, so I wasn't scared, just annoyed that they might keep me up all night. I plugged in headphones and tried to ignore them, but the sounds changed. I started hearing thumping from inside that cabin I thought was empty. Horror struck me at the noise. After a few deep breaths, I told myself it was probably just those raccoons or some other night animal banging around. The cabin didn't have doors or windows. Literally anything could be inside. Again, I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks. Then I saw her, an old woman, her face a map of wrinkles, eyes glowing with a strange light. She limped up to one of the empty windows and stared out through the glassless frame. For a moment, I thought she was looking at me, but then I realized she was just staring down at the ground. She bent over and disappeared inside the cabin for a bit. When she came back, she was dragging a heavy bag through the doorway and across the creaky wooden porch. The sound echoed through the clearing like a death rattle. I was frozen with fear, unable to move no matter what. I hung in my hammock, peeking out like a scared kid swinging between the trees. I was so glad I had hidden my car and myself well enough to stay out of sight. She scattered handfuls of dog food quickly on the ground. The raccoons swarmed her, their eyes rolling in the dark like wet beads. For every raccoon I saw, there were a dozen pairs of eyes tracking it through the woods. I wanted to call out to warn her about the danger she was inviting, but my voice stuck in my throat. Then the raccoons were everywhere. They poured down the trunks of the trees holding my hammock, crawling over the straps in a full stampede. Some stopped and stared at me, the new strange thing in the woods. They didn't linger long once they saw I had no food, then went back to the strange feeding frenzy at the old woman's feet. Her ritual was twisted, a weird midnight routine. She wasn't kind to the animals, sure, she fed. The day I'll always remember was the fall when fear came to our small town. It was a time of cool breezes and bright leaves, but also one of terrible shock. I'm a police officer. I've seen many crime scenes, but nothing prepared me for what we found behind a group of local shops. This happened the same year my son earned a state championship as a pitcher on his baseball team, though that memory now fades into the background. Sadly, the victim was an elderly man known well in our close-knit neighborhood. He was found lying in a pool of blood, his head badly crushed beyond recognition. This man was just an everyday guy in town, usually seen walking his dog in the mornings or hanging out near the library, that kind of routine. For someone to attack him so violently was shocking, way beyond anything we'd ever seen in our area. The murder weapon was left behind, an old rusty post from a nearby mailbox. Whoever did this hit him at least 30 times. The savagery of the crime was disturbing even for someone like me who's dealt with tough cases before. The killer's rage felt almost unnatural. The detectives and forensic team were puzzled, but we officers on patrol had no clue where to begin. There were some security cameras near the shops, but none gave us useful evidence. One showed the victim entering the alley behind the stores around 6 a.m., which was his usual time to walk. No one else appeared on camera entering or leaving until an employee arrived around 8:30 a.m., the time when the body was discovered. Whoever attacked him either stayed in the area or left by some way not caught on video. I remember some of the guys joking in the locker room that maybe aliens were responsible. But as the news of the murder spread, our town was shaken to its core. People were scared, rightly so. The thought that a killer might be living among us, hiding in plain sight, was unbearable. We worked nonstop to find clues, but every lead ran cold. The victim had no known enemies, no shady business, no reason anyone could think of for this kind of attack. It was like the murderer struck completely at random and left nothing behind. As a cop, I've seen some of the darkest parts of people, but this case felt different. The extreme violence and lack of motive was unlike anything I'd come across before. Without any suspects, it felt like we were chasing a ghost. The days that followed were a whirlwind. We put up roadblocks, questioned people nearby, and searched every inch of the crime scene for something. Anything. But no evidence came up. No suspects, no motive. It was as if the killer had disappeared into thin air. The cameras and questions yielded nothing. Within 3 days, the city council started breathing down our necks. They hinted that if we didn't solve it soon, funding for our department might be cut next year. Rumors spread fast. It felt like everything was closing in on us. The community grew restless, and so did we. We began checking out known troublemakers, hoping someone would link to the crime. But every one of those leads was a dead end. The detectives and officers grew more tense and short-tempered by the day. Then we got a break when we interviewed a young troublemaker named Kyle. He was known for causing problems around town for years. When we pressed him about the murder, he said something that caught our attention. "It's probably that weird guy who lives in the walls." "What?" I asked, stunned. "We don't know his real name," Kyle said, "but he lives in the walls downtown." "What does that mean?" I asked again. "I don't know," he shrugged. "He's impossible to catch. We tried to corner him once, but he slipped away around the corner behind the diner. Same place the guy was killed." "So you're saying there's a man who can walk through walls near where the murder happened?" I asked skeptically. "Yeah," Kyle replied, "but he's kind of a local legend. They call him the wall crawler." He seemed uninterested after that and didn't want to say more. My partner and I pushed a little, doing the good cop, bad cop routine. Soon, we had a full timeline and a detailed description of the guy's movements. Apparently, this man had been wandering downtown for about a month. He was a drifter who didn't ask for drugs, money, or even shelter. He seemed to have his own reasons for being there. Some kids tried to rough him up to see what he carried that night, and that was the last time anyone saw him. He had disappeared between those buildings. He was known as the wall crawler because he'd been seen rummaging through dumpsters and trash cans, and apparently, he had a secret way to move through the back alleys that made it seem like he vanished into thin air. Reviewing surveillance footage, we found a few sightings of someone matching the description behaving the same way. We shifted our focus to find this mysterious man. This brought relief not just to our team, but to the whole town. We set up cameras around the murder scene, hoping to catch him again. Hours later, we got a hit. A thin-faced man wearing the same clothes showed up on camera. We quickly sent officers to follow him, but just like Kyle said, he disappeared without a trace. We searched everywhere but found nothing. I had a gut feeling he was still nearby. This disappearing act was what made him so hard to catch. We kept surveillance, waiting for another sighting. Just as we were about to call it a night and switch shifts, he appeared again. He seemed to know every alley, every hidden corner, but he kept walking in circles, like he was waiting for something or someone. Then, just like before, he vanished again. This happened 2 or 3 times, always in the same place, near a long building that housed 2 stores. Across from it was a big walk-in cooler for the diner, a large locked metal container. Behind it ran a concrete wall along the alley. My team searched the area thoroughly with flashlights. Finally, we found a small hole at the bottom of the wall, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. Behind the wall was a dumpster, which looked locked but actually wasn't. The latch was broken, letting anyone open it. This explained the man's vanishing trick. We kept looking and discovered a small camp hidden in some bushes nearby. He spent half his time inside the dumpster and the rest in the outdoor camp area. After we caught him, we learned his name was Roger. He had recently lost his home and was living rough. He was clever, a smart guy who'd done well in school, maybe even valedictorian, but he also had mental health problems and possible drug issues. After college, he fell apart and just drifted around. What happened the morning of the murder was something else. Roger had ended up in our town by chance while hitchhiking. The local kids decided they'd had enough of him hanging around downtown. Roger found that hole behind the diner and set up camp. He used it as a secret way to follow people and try to steal from them without getting caught. The victim, our old man, had just $1/5000 on a scratch ticket he bought at a 24-hour gas station. He was so excited, waving the ticket around, talking to himself behind the restaurant on his way home. Roger saw him, grabbed the mailbox post, and struck him repeatedly to steal the lottery ticket from his pocket. The ticket was still in Roger's possession when we caught him, unclaimed, probably waiting for things to calm down before trying to cash it in. The next day, I returned to the murder scene. Standing there was eerie, looking at the top of that dumpster from across the wall where Roger hid. He'd been right there in plain sight, calling it urban camping during the entire investigation. How many times had we walked past him, unaware, while he watched us from those holes and rust spots? He'd been living there for a month and we had no idea. I'm still with the police, but I've never seen a case quite like that. I'm glad it only took sharp observation to solve it and that it wasn't something worse. Roger is still serving time and will be for a long while. Every summer when I was a kid, my family would take these big camping trips. I was always really excited because we lived in New Mexico, where there wasn't much nature, and we'd go camping in Oregon. Seeing trees and green grass was my favorite part. But I also got to see all my cousins, and even though we only met a few times each year, we were really close. My favorite cousin, who was more like a brother, was Marco. He was 2 years older than me, and when we were together, we were inseparable. Because of what happened that trip, we got even closer after. I think it took us both a while to understand what really took place and how much worse it could have been. It began after we had been there for about 3 days. Most of our family was either swimming in the lake or sitting around the campfire chatting. Marco didn't like to swim, so we decided to play in the woods instead. We played a game similar to tag, which we called Outlaw. We took turns being the sheriff chasing the other, who was the outlaw, until they were caught. We would play for hours, but in the woods, it's easy to run and lose your way. We tried to stay close enough to see each other, but when Marco started chasing me with a big branch, my adrenaline kicked in and I ran super fast. I don't know how far I ran, but eventually, I found myself near an old, worn-out trailer. Marco wasn't far behind, but I remember him throwing the branch down once we got close. We both thought the trailer looked empty and maybe abandoned. We talked about checking it out more, but honestly, I don't know why we decided not to. We started heading back, but we weren't sure exactly where we were going. About 10 minutes into our walk, we saw a couple coming toward us, pushing a shopping cart full of stuff. The woman came up to us and was very friendly. The man stayed behind her. She asked if we were lost, who we were with, our names and ages. I remember when we told her how old we were, she looked back at the man and then at us again. She told us not to be scared and said she would help us get back to our campsite after they put their things away. She also said we could make s'mores with them if we wanted. Marco and I felt unsure, but she seemed really kind, and since it was still daylight, it didn't seem too strange. In my 6-year-old mind, bad people only come out at night, so I thought we'd be okay. We walked with them for a while, following them back to their camp. While the woman and Marco talked, I looked over at the shopping cart. It was filled with rusty metal parts and old scraps. Nothing looked new or clean, and nothing was in bags, just random junk. I started feeling really uneasy, and I could tell Marco did too. Whenever I glanced at the man, he never smiled. Sometimes he just stared at me with a blank, cold look. That was nearly 20 years ago, and I still remember how creepy he seemed. We walked a bit farther until we saw the trailer again. The woman grabbed both of our hands and asked if we were excited to make s'mores. Suddenly, I heard someone call Marco's name, and then mine. We all stopped for a moment. The woman squeezed my hand tighter. She asked the man what to do, but I don't remember his answer. Then she started turning us back toward the trailer, holding our hands tighter and tighter. She began walking faster, almost a hurried pace. I looked behind through the trees and saw my older sister coming toward us. Without thinking, I shouted her name. The woman immediately let go of my hand. Marco and I ran toward my sister as she got closer. She yelled to the others that she had found us. My mom and dad thanked the couple, who then told a long story about how they had been searching for our parents for a while and said we were such polite boys. I remember my parents invited the couple to stay for dinner, but thankfully they said no. Because the woman was so friendly and we were safe, my parents didn't suspect anything. But I do remember my dad and uncle talking about how weird the man was. Marco and I told my sister, who found us, that the couple seemed strange, but I don't think she fully understood what we meant. It wasn't until Marco and I got older and learned more about the world that we talked about it seriously. We both agreed they looked like they might have been struggling for money and maybe had bad plans for us. For years, I never told my parents because I was supposed to be the strong one in the family. Thinking about it made me feel sick and vulnerable. Marco felt embarrassed too since he was older and thought he should have protected me better. We only told our parents a few years ago, but I wish we had spoken up right away. Maybe then something could have been done. Now, I never let my kids out of my sight. I always make sure they know they can tell me anything without fear of punishment or judgment, especially my son. I've always enjoyed camping, especially during autumn when the leaves turn bright colors and the air feels fresh. So when my closest friend, who I'll call Emma, invited me to go camping for her birthday, I didn't hesitate. We gathered our supplies and drove to a quiet spot deep in the forest where Emma's family had camped for many years. As we walked in, a peaceful silence surrounded us. It felt like we were the only two people left on Earth. The walk wasn't long, and once we reached the campsite, we both began setting up our tents and gear. It only took part of an hour, and when we were done, we decided to explore the area. We wandered mostly north, off the usual paths, just exploring until we stumbled upon a faint trail we hadn't seen before. Emma said she didn't know this trail existed since her family never mentioned it. Curious, we followed the narrow path weaving through the trees, which eventually led to an old, run-down cabin. The cabin was tiny and worn, with cracked windows and a sagging roof. Emma was excited to check it out, but I felt a little uneasy, though also curious. We stepped inside. It was obvious nobody had been inside for a very long time. We searched around for anything interesting, maybe some old belongings or signs of who once lived there, but we didn't find much. Just as we were about to leave, I noticed something odd. In the corner of the cabin was a small door I hadn't seen before. It had a rusty padlock on it. I pointed it out to Emma, and we both got curious. The lock was old, covered in rust. I tapped on the door, even though I knew no one was inside, just to be sure. Emma went outside and grabbed a big rock, handing it to me. I hit the lock a few times with the rock until it finally broke. When we pulled the door open, it scraped against the floor. Inside was complete darkness. I shined my flashlight down the doorway and saw a staircase going downward. We both felt uneasy now, but tried to tell ourselves that no one had been here for years and there was nothing to worry about. I led the way down the steep stairs. It wasn't a long descent, maybe 8 or 10 steps before it opened up into a room. What we saw was unsettling. There were several small mattresses scattered on the floor along with some modern-looking furniture. The mattresses looked fairly new, no older than 5 years. Something about it made me feel scared, and we quickly hurried back upstairs. We slammed the door shut behind us and stood there, confused and unsure about what we'd just seen. We wondered if maybe it was the site of a crime or something illegal since everything seemed so out of place. While I was trying to figure it out, Emma suddenly quieted me. From a distance, we heard footsteps approaching the cabin. The person walked right past it without stopping or even looking at the building. I could tell Emma was just as puzzled as I was. Once the footsteps were gone, we ran back to our campsite and then drove straight to Emma's home. We called the police just to be safe. To us, the fact that the person didn't stop at the cabin meant they must have known about it. We weren't sure if that was a good thing or something dangerous, so we left it to the police to investigate. The police checked out the cabin and the surrounding area but found nothing that explained anything. They said it was strange and could possibly be something bad, but there was no evidence to support that. The whole situation became a big topic in our town for a while. People speculated endlessly about what the cabin could have been used for. Eventually, the city decided to tear the cabin down to discourage visitors. No one ever figured out the real story behind that place, and maybe it will never be solved. But I still have a feeling deep down that something terrible happened there. Prepare yourself to be on the edge of your seat. This next video comes from a Brazilian YouTube channel called Caçadores das Sombras, where João and Rafael dive into mysteries that blur the border between the living and the dead. From uncovering scary legends to spending nights in abandoned places believed to be haunted, no challenge is too tough for them. They love sharing every creepy moment with their viewers. In this episode, João, Rafael, and some friends went deep into a forest known for being the home of the Curupira. According to Brazilian tales, the Curupira is a creature with fiery red hair, looking like a man or a dwarf, but with feet facing backward to confuse anyone who tries to follow it. Often linked to dark forces, this being is said to roam Brazil's rainforests, punishing hunters and poachers who take more than they should, especially those who harm animals taking care of their young. Though stories change from place to place, one thing is clear: the Curupira is not to be messed with. For the group, that was reason enough to spend the night in the forest, hoping to spot this mysterious being. It was May 12, 2024. After setting up their camp and spending some time around the fire, they got ready to start their investigation. With cameras in hand and a mix of excitement and nervousness, they left the cozy warmth of their fire and stepped into the cold, quiet darkness of the woods. After exploring around the camp for some time, the group felt a mix of disappointment and relief. They hadn't seen anything strange yet, but at least the area seemed safe. Deciding to rest a bit, they went back to their campfire to keep it alive and collect themselves. They had no idea that the scariest part of the night was still ahead. No matter how hard they tried to shake the feeling, the sense that something was watching them from the dark only grew stronger. Though the crackling fire gave little comfort, a heavy uneasiness settled over everyone. Determined to clear their minds and make sure nothing was nearby, they decided to head back into the forest once more. This time, however, they didn't come back empty-handed. They came face to face with exactly what they'd been searching for. The figure matched the description of the Curupira, a man-like creature wrapped in flickering flames. Shock quickly turned into panic. Hearts racing, they fired shots toward it, but nothing happened. The creature stood still, unaffected, looming in the dark. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared, leaving the group in total confusion. In the chaos, they got separated in the pitch-black forest. Their panicked movements only made things worse. João called out, his voice breaking the silence, but no one answered. Fear set in as they scrambled blindly, desperate to find each other. With no other choice, they retreated back to camp, hoping to reunite and understand what had just happened. One by one, they managed to gather back at camp, shaken and confused. They tried to make sense of the terrifying encounter and, desperate for answers, made one last decision: to return to the spot where they saw the creature and check if the fire was still burning in the woods. After regrouping and thinking over the frightening experience, the group agreed they had enough. The chance of seeing that creature again was too risky, and their safety came first. Without delay, they packed up their gear, put out the fire, and left the forest behind. Though deeply shaken by what they saw, they also felt a strange sense of accomplishment. After all, they came looking for the Curupira and might have caught something on camera that can't be easily explained. Most importantly, they all made it out safe, even if the eerie memory of that night will probably stay with them forever. Ethan decides to go solo camping in a woodland area ominously called the Quiet Woods. According to many accounts, Campers here have all shared the same eerie experience. The forest suddenly going completely silent just before strange, unexplained noises start echoing among the trees. Beyond that, this place is known for a lot of paranormal activity, and some even say they've spotted Bigfoot or other legendary beings. Curious about the stories, Ethan sets out to find if there's any truth behind these rumors. It's January 18th, 2025. By the time Ethan gets there, the sun has already disappeared, covering the forest in darkness. After recalling some of the chilling tales he read about this place, he wastes no time setting up camp for the night. Once the fire is burning and his tent is ready, he prepares for the investigation ahead. I wasn't planning on lighting a fire tonight, and I don't want to spend the night trying to keep it alive, so I'll enjoy it while it lasts. After that, I'll jump inside the tent and stay warm with the heater I brought. The tent was quick to set up. Almost got attacked by a branch falling on me, but all good now. Done. Set up. Now I just have to get all my stuff inside and level the ground a bit more. There we go. As you can see, he got his camp arranged as well as possible. He got some heat going inside the tent. It's nice, really nice, much better than outside, for sure. With everything in place, Ethan feels ready for the investigation he plans to do from inside his tent, hoping to connect with the paranormal using his ghost hunting gear. He starts by asking questions through his spirit box. At first, the answers seem random, but he stays patient, hoping for something meaningful to come through. The night remains quiet and the forest still, until something unsettling happens. Someone's coming. Who's coming? Is it the one I saw earlier? The shadow-like figure. The sudden footsteps followed by a loud snap, like a heavy branch breaking under pressure, immediately put Ethan on edge. His heart races as he remembers the last response from the spirit box. There's someone coming. Just before those noises appeared from the dark around him, Ethan is frozen in place. He doesn't call out but listens closely, his heart pounding as rustling sounds grow closer. Then, just as suddenly as they came, they vanish and silence returns to the forest's unnatural quiet. Ethan wonders if what he heard was paranormal. There's no way that was a coincidence. Absolutely no way. After that last message, the spirit box went completely silent. Ethan waits for a few minutes, 5, maybe 7, but nothing. That was too much of a coincidence to ignore. Still trying to process what happened, Ethan sets the spirit box aside and switches to other equipment, hoping for clearer answers. But as time goes on, the silence continues. The tense feeling fades into emptiness, as if whatever presence was there has pulled away completely. He cycles through his devices, waiting for any sign, but nothing appears. It seems the spirits no longer want to communicate, and no matter how much he tries, the eerie stillness remains. That was a pretty big letdown. Started off promising, then slowed down, fewer answers, then nothing at all. I didn't bring all my gear, but I don't think it would have helped. If something doesn't want to talk, it just won't. Disappointed, Ethan decides to call it a night, trying to relax and forget the earlier unsettling events. He gets into his sleeping bag and lets the warmth of the tent comfort him as tiredness takes over. But just as he's getting comfortable and starting to drift off, a sound breaks the silence. Faint at first, but clearly very close. His body tenses as he realizes something is moving right outside his tent. The rustling followed by clear, steady footsteps sends a chill down Ethan's spine. His heart races as he lies frozen for a moment, trying to figure out what he's hearing. Not sure if it's an animal, a person, or something else. The unknown gnaws at him, and the idea of staying inside without answers feels even worse. Unable to ignore the growing unease, he climbs out of his sleeping bag, takes a deep breath, and decides to look outside. What was that? Is someone here? As he slowly unzips the tent, a few sharp bangs echo through the trees, making him freeze again. Summoning his courage, he steps outside, but is met with silence. Scanning the area, he finds nothing. The forest is empty once more. I don't know. Then I heard something metallic. I wonder if it was this. He listens carefully, thinking back to the clanging noise he definitely heard. Trying to make sense of what just happened only makes Ethan more uneasy. The eerie silence afterward does nothing to calm his nerves, and the thought of something dangerous so close to his tent stays with him. He weighs his options, wondering whether to stay and push through the night or leave before anything else occurs. After a while, he makes his decision. It's early morning now, and the chance of getting any sleep feels impossible. Still on edge and feeling a bit let down, he starts packing up his gear, glancing around often, half expecting to hear another noise in the dark. Once everything is packed, he wastes no time leaving the campsite behind. As he walks out of the forest, one question keeps running through his mind. What was out there in the dark? One thing is for sure, this was a night he will never forget. (2022), just outside a remote area in eastern Tennessee, where they planned to spend the night, the three friends met up with Mark to get acquainted before heading deeper into the wilderness. Luke, do you want to explain why we're here in this part of Tennessee, out in the middle of nowhere, looking for Bigfoot? Bigfoot? Yeah, we're meeting up with a researcher who's pretty well known. He's done stuff with a couple of documentary channels and claims there's a chance we might find Bigfoot around here, at some secret spot he won't reveal to us. So yeah, guys, we're meeting up with a guy we barely know. Luke maybe texted him once or twice, that's it. That's all the info we have, but basically we're going to look for Bigfoot. So let's get going. Ready to head into the woods and maybe meet our end? Good to meet you, Luke. Mark, nice to meet you. Should I just follow you somewhere? Yeah, follow me. The roads get rough after the main highway, but if I can drive it, you'll be fine. Cool, let's do this. With Mark leading the way, the group headed toward the isolated spot where they planned to camp. A mix of nervousness and excitement filled the air. Even though an uneasy feeling crept in, their curiosity kept pushing them forward. This area is known for frequent Bigfoot sightings, and they were determined to see if the rumors were true. When they reached the hidden site, Mark shared stories from his many years of research, telling of strange events he'd witnessed. It set the mood for what was coming next. Don't think of Bigfoot like the cartoons or movies. It's very dangerous. If you're out in the woods and encounter one, you're alone with it. And if there's one, there's got to be more. They say Bigfoot's been spotted in places like Washington, Missouri, so maybe they're everywhere? Nobody really knows. It's a mystery. Here's what I think after all my research. There are probably different kinds of Bigfoot across the country. Not all of them are giant 8 to 10 foot tall monsters. Some might be smaller, depending on what they eat or where they live. I've tracked maybe 2 family groups in this region. This area we're in now is over 900 acres of protected forest. Nobody's allowed to hunt here, so it's a safe place. From the sightings I've heard about, they often use power line clearings, the open paths where utility companies cut trees. They move along those to get in and out of the deeper woods, and those spots are where they're often seen. Near those clearings, crossing roads, or climbing hills. Bigfoot in this area seem a bit more aggressive and territorial than others. Reports tell of snarling, teeth showing, even throwing rocks at people. That's why I'm focused here. I think this might be the best chance anywhere to see one. I believe they sleep somewhere around here. Maybe tonight we'll find out. Armed with this information and ready, the group ventured into the thick woods, anticipation growing with each step. A strange mixture of tension and excitement fueled their trek, though they had no idea what the night would bring. The sun began to set. They'd been out about an hour or a bit more. Wow, this red sunset light looks incredible, really cool. Yeah, and we can only see about 40 yards ahead, maybe less. Whatever you're seeing on the camera, that's exactly what we're seeing too. You're seeing what we see. Suddenly, something appeared in the distance. What's that? Why is it there? That scared me. I thought it was glowing red eyes or something. It was just a small reflective piece nailed to a tree. As darkness fell, the forest swallowed the area. Shadows twisted in the fading light, making the place feel even more eerie. Every rustle and far-off noise added to the tension in this already infamous spot. They pushed deeper and reached a place where Mark and others had reported odd noises and strange sights. Just as they were taking it all in, something caught their attention. Can you see that over there? Is that a stump or something? Yeah, behind that tree. I can't see it well on the camera, but it definitely looked like something moved. It really looked like Bigfoot for a second. They realized it was just a wooden stump and laughed, feeling a bit relieved but also disappointed. But the forest seemed alive. Then suddenly, a loud sound came from across the river. That wasn't a car. Did you get that? We're across the river, about 100 yards away. That's really close. That's scary. Sounds like it's right behind us. Do you think we should call more people? We might be dinner here. The noises kept coming. Grunts that sounded close, closer than coyotes' howls. Coyotes barked and yipped nearby. But beneath those sounds, a deeper, guttural grunting echoed, making the group more tense. Every sound in the dark felt amplified. They joked nervously to keep calm, trying to tell themselves there was nothing to fear. But the night was far from over. Things were about to get worse. Mark reminded them to stop and listen often while in the woods. If something's following you, whether Bigfoot or any predator, it's probably close by before you realize it. So stop every so often and listen. What the heck are we doing? Hunting Bigfoot? We're gonna die in these woods. If anyone finds this footage later, they'll think it's like the Blair Witch or something. No one will believe it. Suddenly, something growled near them. Did you hear that? Something's close, right next to us. I swear I just heard a growl. Yeah, that was definitely a growl. It feels like they know we're here, watching us. Maybe we should leave. It's getting closer. The group moved quickly, lights scanning behind them. That was a growl. I told you something's very close. More voices came from the left. We need to head back to the trail. Even though they were armed, the fear grew as the sounds surrounded them from all sides. They decided to retreat toward the nearest trail, hoping for safety. But the night wasn't done. The danger followed. I think it's right behind me. Let's get out to the gravel road. Stay close behind me. We can switch to normal flashlights for better visibility. The tension was intense. Whatever was following them was close and persistent. At one point, the group heard what sounded like voices and chanting. Mark explained that sometimes during Bigfoot sightings, people hear something called F-speech, attempts by the creature to imitate human voices. What if that's what we heard? That's not just coyotes, someone said, pointing out the nearby animals across the river. There's definitely something out here. With every step, tension grew. Mark kept his weapon ready, alert for anything coming from the shadows. Their curiosity had brought them here, but now survival was their top priority. They tried to navigate back, but quickly realized escaping this wild forest wasn't as simple as they thought. We're at the river again? Where are we? We just came full circle. No way. How did that happen? We were walking straight toward the gravel road. Do you think the coyotes are still around? This makes no sense. Look, people will watch this on YouTube and say we're faking it, but we have no idea how we ended up back here. They decided to press on, hoping to find the trail soon. Finally, the group found the path and took a moment to catch their breath. The fear began to fade, replaced by relief and adrenaline. They reflected on the strange sounds and eerie experiences. That growl, that wasn't a coyote. There was only one, but coyotes usually travel in packs. I just don't know how to explain what we heard. Exhausted after hours in the wilderness, they chose to call off the overnight stay and head back to their vehicles. They arrived safe but deeply shaken by the night's unknown dangers. After Mark uploaded the footage online, viewers flooded the comments with stories of their own Bigfoot sightings and experiences. Though the mystery stayed unsolved, one thing was clear. This night in the Tennessee wilderness was unforgettable for the group and their audience. Around the end of last summer, two buddies and I went on a camping trip in Alberta. We picked a fairly busy campground that had a reputation for being really laid back. That evening, we made a warm meal, passed around a bottle of wine, and stayed up late chatting under the stars. It was close to 1 in the morning. By then, we were probably the only ones still up. Everything else was dead quiet around us. Out of nowhere, We heard this pounding, heavy running sound coming straight toward our sight. At that exact moment, a sick, cold fear spread through my chest. I've never felt anything like it in my life. What made it strange was that at first we figured it was a person. It had to be massive, though, because the ground literally trembled with each step. The night was pitch dark, and our little camp lights made it hard to see anything past the glow they gave off. Whatever it was came at us at full speed, and then there was this huge splash in the creek that ran right beside our camp. We didn't wait around. We bolted straight into the car and locked the doors. Our first guess was that it might have been a grizzly, but even now when we bring it up, none of us are totally convinced. It's hard to explain, but that intense wave of fear hit all three of us before we even heard anything coming. It's like our bodies knew something awful was about to happen. Even now, thinking back on it, it's still the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. This happened around 12 months back. A few of my buddies and I made the last-minute decision to go camping late at night. I know it sounds random, but with everything that had been going on around that time, we just wanted to escape and be out in the fresh air. We came up with a solid plan in less than an hour, got excited, packed up our stuff, and jumped into my car. We drove out of the main city, past the suburbs, and stopped in a small rural town. We parked there since the trail into the woods wasn't drivable. It felt kind of funny. City guys hauling gear like tents, knives, backpacks, and food through the dark. No one acted nervous, even though we were deep in the forest with just our phone flashlights to guide the way. After walking for a few hours, we found this neat little clearing next to a small pond. The space was wide and open, perfect for camping. We picked our spots and set up the tents. All four of us had done our time in the military, and we'd been through survival courses, so none of us were worried. We didn't really think anything could go wrong. Once we were settled, one of my friends and I wandered off to scout the area. We checked things out, grabbed some branches and wood, then made a fire. We sat around it, chatting and laughing about how unlucky our generation had been lately. Time moved fast, and before we knew it, it was close to 5 in the morning. We figured it was time to sleep so we could get a few hours of rest and still enjoy the daylight later. Not even 10 minutes after crawling into our tents, we heard a cat meowing nearby. It didn't sound normal, it sounded distressed. I've got 2 cats at home with my girlfriend, and I grew up in a house where cats were always around, so I could tell something was off. The rest of the group looked confused too. We were far from any homes or farms, so how would a cat end up all the way out here? We stepped outside to take a look. There it was, a black cat, just standing a few meters away. None of us are really into superstition or anything like that, but we all started to feel uneasy. I know it sounds silly, but it was just off. I had some sausages in my pack, so I took one out and tried tossing a bit of it near her. She watched it for a second, then suddenly disappeared into the dark like she'd never been there. I figured she'd run off and blended into the woods, so I didn't think too much about it. We went back into our tents to try sleeping again. Maybe 10 or 15 minutes passed, and one of the guys whispered that something was moving outside. At first, we thought it was a stray dog or maybe that same black cat. We unzipped the tent a little to peek out, and that's when we saw it. A massive wild boar was standing just outside the tent. Now, boars aren't exactly rare in the forest, so at first it didn't seem like a big deal. But something felt wrong. If you've never seen one up close, they're no joke. Fast, powerful, and tough to stop. You don't want to mess with them unless you're armed and know exactly where to aim. We didn't have anything like that. We sat completely still, whispering to each other, trying to figure out what to do if it decided to charge at us or trample the tent. That's when we heard it again, the cat's meow. That's when things started to feel really messed up. The cat appeared again, walking close to the boar like it didn't care. It came within maybe a meter of our tent, right beside this huge, dangerous animal. None of us could figure out why the cat wasn't scared. And even stranger, the boar didn't react to the cat at all. They just moved around like they'd done this before, like they were together. I can't explain it. None of us could. I don't know if someone else could give a logical reason for it, but the whole thing freaked us out. For nearly an hour, the cat and the boar circled our tent. They didn't attack, didn't run off, just paced around us. Then, just like before, the cat vanished into the night. It was gone. The boar hung around a little longer before slowly walking off into the trees. I don't know if there's a normal explanation. Maybe it was just two animals doing weird stuff at the same time. But to us, in that moment, it was terrifying. The timing, the way they acted, the way they stuck so close. It all felt too strange. Even now, I still think about it sometimes. I've never seen anything like that again, and I don't know anyone else who has. If anyone can explain it, I'd love to hear it, because that night left all of us completely rattled. This all went down about 11 years ago, shortly after me and some buddies finished up college and got hit with the full weight of how deep in debt we really were. We figured we needed to do at least one last fun thing together before we split up and went our separate ways. After throwing out a bunch of ideas, we landed on a camping trip way out in the middle of nowhere. Sounded perfect on paper. It took about a 4-hour drive followed by another good 2-hour hike to get to the place we picked to set up. Once we got there, though, everything started off great. We had more than enough food and snacks packed up, and since this wasn't really bear territory, we felt relaxed. We just had a solid time hanging out, laughing, eating, and enjoying being away from everything. That night, after settling down, something weird started happening with one of my friends. It worked out that we were sharing a tent, so when I noticed something off about him, I asked what was up. He admitted he'd been feeling on edge since we got there. Said he couldn't shake the sense that something or someone was watching us. Said it was making him really uneasy. That was strange, especially coming from him. Normally, he's the guy who lights up the room. He's always cracking jokes, getting everyone to loosen up, and generally making things fun. Seeing him so down and unsettled threw me off. None of us really knew how to handle it. I just told him to get into his sleeping bag and try to sleep it off. We had plans to do some hiking and other stuff the next day, and I figured a good night's sleep would help. He didn't say much, just rolled over and mumbled something like, "Fine." So I let it go. I'm a heavy sleeper, and I was out pretty quick. But I didn't stay that way for long. At some point, I felt him shaking me, trying to wake me up. It startled me, and I sat up kind of grumpy, asking what the hell was going on. He just told me to stay quiet, said someone was out there, still half asleep. I didn't believe him at first. I reminded him that when we pulled up to the parking area, our car was the only one there, and the trail out here wasn't exactly hidden. If someone had been around, we'd have seen them during the hike. But he was insistent, told me to get up and follow him. So I dragged myself out of the bag, saw the fire was just glowing with the last bits of coals, and noticed everyone else still sound asleep. He handed me a flashlight but told me not to turn it on. We just sat there in silence for a bit, listening. The woods were full of the usual night sounds. Crickets, wind, maybe a distant owl. I was already irritated and exhausted, and after several long minutes of hearing absolutely nothing unusual, I figured it was just his nerves. I reached over and gently tapped his shoulder to say I was heading back to sleep. But before I could even say anything, we both heard a noise, something moving around in the brush nearby. I paused, thinking it had to be some animal. Raccoons, foxes, even deer. It's not strange for them to be active at night. Still, we sat frozen, listening. He looked at me and said, "You heard that, right?" I said, "Yeah," but I figured it was probably just a deer. He didn't buy it, though. Said it wasn't. He never really explained why he was so sure, but he was dead serious. I was at the end of my patience by that point. I was worn out, mad, and totally convinced there was no one following us. Besides, it didn't sound like boots or heavy footsteps, just something rustling around. I said something like, "This is crap," flipped on my flashlight, and aimed it toward the sound. What I saw in that moment is something that'll probably stay with me forever. Standing close to a tree was a tall, skinny figure that looked barely alive. Its limbs were too long, and it looked like it was covered in scruffy patches of hair. The best way I can describe it is like some sick-looking animal, kind of like a bear with a disease, but all wrong. It stood on 2 legs and stared straight at us. Its eyes had this hateful kind of glare. I only had the flashlight pointed at it for maybe a second or two before it bolted into the darkness. We could hear it crashing through the undergrowth as it ran. We both lost it, yelling out in pure panic. Our first instinct was to run, but we had no idea where we'd even go. So instead we scrambled to throw more logs onto the fire and just sat there next to it, not saying much, just huddled together in silence. I'm not proud of it, but we were holding hands like little kids. We kept watch the whole time, jumping at every little sound. Our flashlights were on non-stop until the batteries completely died. We didn't stop scanning the area, expecting that thing to come back at any moment. But it didn't. When morning finally came and our other friends started waking up, cheerful and totally unaware of what we'd gone through, we didn't tell them what happened. They were in good spirits and we didn't want to ruin the trip. We were supposed to be out there for a few more days. Me and my friend who saw it tried our best to act like everything was okay, but we weren't fooling anyone. The others could tell something was bothering us. When they asked, we just said we'd had bad dreams and didn't sleep well. I'm sure they didn't buy that for a second. We never talked about it again. We finished out the trip, but neither of us ever went camping in the woods after that. And I doubt I ever will again. I was out camping with a few friends on land that belonged to one of their relatives. The place sat right next to a national park. We had set up our tents just inside the cleared area of the property. The tents were facing a small house and a shed, and behind us was some wild, untouched land that eventually led into the national park boundary. I was sharing a tent with my boyfriend at the time and one of his buddies. I was lying at the back of the tent, right beside a mesh window. We had all the flaps unzipped so air could flow through, since it was a pretty warm night. At some point, I woke up feeling like something was moving around the camp. I didn't hear anyone walking around, but I noticed something shifting around back in the woods behind us. I saw what looked like a completely black, person-shaped figure peeking out from behind a tree, then slowly pulling back behind it. Kept doing that, leaning out a bit, then slipping back behind the tree. I shook my boyfriend awake and asked him if he could see it too. He said he didn't see exactly what I did, but he thought he saw something dart off farther into the woods. He switched places with me so he was closer to the window, and then we both tried to get some sleep again. His friend, the one who was also in the tent, didn't wake up at all. The next day, when we talked about it, my boyfriend said whatever he saw was definitely walking on two legs, not a deer or any kind of animal like that. We were camped out about 2 miles from a public hiking path and maybe around 4 miles from a state-run campsite. There were a few other houses along the same road that edged the forest, but they were all spaced far apart. We still don't really know who or what we saw that night, but it was definitely strange, and it didn't feel like anyone had a reason to be out there that late. Whatever it was, it shouldn't have been anywhere near that property. It was definitely on land that belonged to our friends' folks. My relatives were out there with some close friends of the family. They had brought a camper, and we had set up a large gray tent. It was one of the bigger campsites with a couple of major paths that led through the area and connected to the main road. It's important to mention that no other groups were camping anywhere close by, at least not for a few miles in either direction. We had set up near a little hollow, hidden behind some bushes on one end, and the camper van was parked on the opposite side. That meant anyone walking down those trails would pass right between our setups. We spent most of the day riding ATVs and hanging out before eventually heading off to our own tents and camper to turn in for the night. I've always had a tough time falling asleep while camping, and that night wasn't any different. Around 2 a.m., according to my phone, I looked out through the semi-see-through mesh section of the tent. Across the trail, something like a stick or a small log was visible. It caught my eye because it looked slightly out of place. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out exactly what it was, but the light on it didn't flicker or move. Not long after that, I clearly remember hearing footsteps. Slow, dragging steps that crunched the loose gravel underfoot. They circled our tent again and again, going around the outer edges. At first, I thought maybe it was a curious animal checking out our area, maybe even irritated we'd taken its usual path or bedding spot. But the longer it went on, the more unsettling it became. The steady pace of the steps, without stopping or speeding up, was weird. That stick or whatever it was outside the mesh was still lit by the moon or maybe a reflection, but it hadn't moved either. Eventually, I started to drift off a little. But I woke back up suddenly when I noticed something had changed. The footsteps had stopped, and that object outside my window wasn't there anymore. But then something else. Just a few feet away, right outside the mesh part of the tent, I spotted what looked like a crouching shape. It wasn't moving. Its outline reminded me of one of those weird figures from a video game. Outlast 2 ***, I think. It looked unclothed and had what seemed like twigs or something sticking out around its head. I couldn't tell what direction it was looking because I've never had great night vision. But it was there, clearly. My memory gets fuzzy after that. At some point, the shape was gone, and I could see that stick again across the trail. Oddly, it now looked more like a cross to me than just a stick. Then I finally fell asleep. The next morning, everything seemed perfectly normal. The first thing I did was check the ground for any signs of the footsteps I had heard. But all that was out there was gravel and compacted dirt. Nothing that would hold a print, and nothing unusual stood out. Later over breakfast, we got to talking, and it turns out other people saw something too. Around 2:30 a.m., after I had finally passed out, someone spotted a lone person walking through the camp with a flashlight, coming straight off the trail and cutting through the middle of our site. It wasn't anyone from our group. We all agreed in the end it must have just been someone wandering around for whatever reason. But I still think about that shape I saw and how the footsteps stopped just before it showed up. I don't have a solid answer for what it could have been. Still gives me chills when I think about it. Any guesses? I've lived most of my life in Alabama and always enjoyed hiking around the state, but I'll admit, Tennessee has the best mountain trails. That's why I often drive up there to spend a day or two hiking and camping. This particular trip, I traveled with my relatives in a camper and stayed with them in a small mountain town called Townsend. The following morning, they dropped me off about 10 miles away at the base of the Foothills Trail. My plan was to hike up, stay the night, and come back down early the next day. I've had plenty of experience hiking and camping, but this was my first time doing an overnight trip completely solo. On top of that, I hadn't brought any sort of protection, not even a small handgun, which I now never go without. The hike started off fine, but the trail turned out to be more tiring than I expected. It wasn't extremely steep. It was more like endless rolling hills that wore me down. Just when I thought I was getting close, another hill would appear. The daylight started fading, and I realized I needed to stop soon and set up camp while I still had enough light to see. I decided to stop for the night around half a mile before the top and planned to reach the summit the next morning. Nothing strange happened at first. I set up my tent in a decent clearing, made myself a quick meal, and settled inside for the night. It was only then that I realized I hadn't passed a single other hiker the entire way up. That didn't feel weird to me at the time, but it would soon. I had trouble falling asleep, which wasn't unusual. I normally just lie there for a while, waiting to doze off. While I was lying awake, I thought I heard someone lightly stepping around near my tent. The sound had a steady pattern to it, like someone carefully walking. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, but I still reached for my big survival knife from my pack and tucked it into my sleeping bag beside me, just in case. When I woke up in the morning, I fixed some instant oatmeal and started getting my gear packed up. That's when I noticed something odd. Sitting right up against my tent was a strange little bundle of dry twigs and some red berries, all tied together with a piece of green string. I was completely freaked out. My stomach dropped. I packed everything as fast as I could, skipped my original plan to hit the summit, and started making my way down the trail. I didn't waste a single minute. As I descended, a thick fog started rolling in. At one point, I accidentally wandered onto a side path that faded out the further I followed it. I quickly realized I was lost. Thankfully, I had brought a compass and used it to figure out the right direction, eventually finding the main trail again. That was one of the biggest moments of relief I've ever felt in my life. I made it out without any other problems. But later that same day, I learned something deeply disturbing. A 28-year-old man had died on the exact stretch of trail I had been hiking on the very same morning I came down. From what I read, His family has since tried to remove most of the online articles about what happened to him, but I did manage to dig up some information. Apparently, he had fallen while trying to climb out of a steep drop-off and didn't have his backpack with him. He had managed to call emergency services, but the call didn't go through fully. No words were ever exchanged. The most unsettling part for me wasn't even the news about his death. It was the realization that someone had known exactly where I was during the night, watched me even, and I had no idea they were there. That detail alone still gives me chills. When I was a kid, I went on a camping trip with my family and had a couple of strange experiences. The first happened when I was about 6 years old. My dad and I were walking to the creek to brush our teeth, and our dog was acting really weird, jumpy and restless, glancing around like she was on edge and staring at the dirt a lot. I didn't really get what was wrong with her until we were on our way back. That's when we finally figured out what had her so worked up. A really long, bluish-gray water snake suddenly whipped out near me, fast. Before I could react, my dad yanked me out of the way and picked me up, carrying me all the way back to our campsite. The whole thing happened so quickly. Looking back now, I realize how close I came to getting bitten. The second thing happened when I was almost 11. I was out on another camping trip, this time with a good friend of mine and both of our families. One afternoon, we decided to go wandering around some big rock formations not too far from where the adults were chatting and relaxing near our tents. They told us it was fine to explore as long as we stayed together. Basic buddy system rules. After walking for a bit, we could faintly hear the sound of water flowing somewhere nearby. Excited, we ran down this gravelly slope toward what we figured was a stream or a small river. We were planning to mess around in the water a little before heading back. But right as we got close, we heard this low, rough growling sound. It didn't sound like any normal animal noise. It was deep, kind of angry sounding, and coming from the same direction as the water. Right then, I got this awful gut feeling, and my friend clearly did too, because we both froze for a second before taking off in the opposite direction. Full sprint all the way back to our families. Later that night, we heard that one of the groups camping not far from us had their tents torn up and their food storage completely ransacked. Turns out it was a bear, and the prints they found led back toward the river, exactly where we had heard that noise earlier in the day. So yeah, the lesson here is simple. Always stay cautious when you're near rivers or creeks out in the woods. You just never know what's waiting nearby. This all happened quite a few years back, but I still think about it sometimes. My friend and I had arrived at our usual camping area, Pine Rock Trail Grounds, just outside of Prescott, Arizona. We usually made the trip 2 or 3 times a year. The views were amazing, and it was only a short drive from the city. The place was mostly quiet and remote. A small general store sat a few miles away, with a tiny town about 20 miles before that. The entrance was a gravel road that came right off the highway. There was a sign near the start with local wildlife info, fire danger levels, and any campground updates. The road was mostly straight, with one fork that spread out for several miles. We once drove down both sides just to explore. One side led to another highway, passing a ranger lookout tower. The other side dead-ended after a while, with an old rundown cabin off to the side, mostly hidden behind tall trees and thick bushes. The snow had mostly melted by then, leaving a cool breeze in the air. You could feel spring beginning to take hold. We saw some wild horses, a few deer, and all sorts of small animals. It really was the best time to get away from city life for a bit. We pulled in around 4 p.m. on a Wednesday, a little later than we usually arrived. Normally, we aimed to get there by noon. This trip wasn't really planned. We both had shifts that weekend and decided to go on a whim. The sun was already starting to go down, and we hadn't picked a spot yet. There were maybe 2 other groups, both families, set up near the front entrance, not far from the main road. This time, though, we wanted to stay away from people. Working customer service will do that to you. We kept driving past our regular spot and finally found a great little clearing near the edge of a slope. From there, we could see the whole valley below, and the view during sunset was unreal. It would have become our go-to spot if what happened the following night hadn't occurred. We made a fire and skipped putting up the tent. We didn't bring much anyway. Her SUV was roomy enough. I planned to sleep stretched out in the back, and she would take the passenger seat with the window cracked open. We had enough blankets and quickly drifted into that kind of deep outdoor sleep that hits you after a long day. The next day passed quietly. We finally felt relaxed, but I kept feeling like someone was nearby, watching us. Every now and then, I'd hear leaves crunching just past where I could see. I told myself it was just animals. My friend didn't notice anything. She always seemed unaware of stuff like that, so I didn't bring it up. As night came, that feeling hadn't left. She must have picked up on it too, because she took some sleeping pills. She rarely needed them when we camped. Usually, the sounds of the forest would knock you out. Around 1 a.m., she had already passed out in the front. I was lying in the back, scrolling through Instagram. My head rested against the window behind the passenger seat, and my legs stretched to the back door. The window opposite me was open slightly, letting the cold air drift in. I had just kept scrolling, not thinking much of it, when I heard leaves crunching outside the car. The sound was close. I whispered her name to see if she heard it, but she didn't respond. She was out cold. I stopped and listened carefully. After about a minute, nothing. I assumed it was just another deer. 10 minutes later, the noise came again. This time, it was right outside the car. I lowered my phone. My eyes took a second to adjust to the dark. As I turned the screen away, its backlight hit the window above my feet. And to this day, I can't forget what I saw next. Two filthy hands were gripping the edge of the window. The fingers curled inward into the car. Their nails were long, dirty, and jagged. A face was pressed against the glass. Fog kept forming and fading as it breathed. All I could see were two empty, black eyes. I froze, couldn't yell, couldn't move. We just stared at each other. Felt like forever. Why weren't they leaving? What were they doing? Were they waiting for something? After what felt like an eternity, the hands slowly let go and vanished into the shadows. The fog on the window cleared. A few seconds later, I heard slow footsteps crunching away into the forest. Still, I just sat there. I didn't react. I couldn't believe it had just happened. Then my body kicked into overdrive. I slammed my fists on the seat, waking my friend in a panic. I unlocked the door, kicked it open, and stood there, trying to see anything. But whoever or whatever had been there was already gone. I rushed to grab all our gear and shoved it into the SUV. Every few seconds, I checked behind me. I closed the back, and that's when I saw them. Two handprints on the window. I wiped them off quickly, like I was trying to erase the memory. I jumped into the front, started the engine, and hit the gas. My friend, still half asleep, asked what was going on. I told her, "Someone's out here. We have to leave." I didn't see anyone as we drove off. As we flew down the dirt path, she asked me to slow down. I eventually did. Once we reached the highway, I drove another 20 miles or so before she asked me to pull into a diner. We stopped at a Denny's, and she asked me to tell her everything. I stopped having nightmares a few months later, but the embarrassment still lingers. I always thought people either fight or flee, but I just froze. I did nothing. Even now, I wonder who or what that was. Just some creep messing with us? Someone from that old cabin? Or maybe something else out there watching people sleep from the trees? We went back to that place in the years after, but never too far from the road. Whatever it was, I hope I never see it again. Another time, I was camping on my own, about 10 miles southwest of a town called Jasper. I had everything I needed and spent a few hours walking through the woods before starting a fire. As night fell, I sat near the flames, scrolling through my phone, when a strange feeling hit me. I couldn't explain it, just a strong sense of being watched. I tried to ignore it and headed to bed. I always tied my tent zippers, just as a weird habit in case someone tried sneaking in. I also kept a pistol with me at all times. I laid there quietly, listening. Then I heard something. Someone was fiddling with the zipper. They didn't know it was tied. I stayed completely silent and reached for my weapon. The softest footsteps circled the tent. The fire outside had dimmed, but I saw a shadow move across it. I stayed calm. I slowly untied the zipper but didn't open it yet. I knew the noise might alert them. I waited, nothing for a few moments. Then I slowly unzipped the flap just enough to peek through. What I saw made my skin crawl. Two men stood at the edge of my sight. In the low light, I couldn't tell where they were looking. One moved out of sight, likely behind the tent. I carefully cocked my .40 caliber, making as little noise as possible. I was sure they hadn't heard. Then one of them whispered. The other began creeping toward my tent.
I reagerat fast.
I threw the zipper open and fired. The man dropped to his knees. I turned to check behind me. It was quiet. Then out of nowhere, the second guy rushed at me with a machete. He slashed, just missing my arm. I pulled the trigger and hit him right in the face. He fell instantly. I thought he was dead. Then I heard movement. The first guy wasn't groaning anymore. Suddenly, he tackled me and stabbed me twice in my right side. Luckily, I had some background in grappling. The adrenaline kicked in. I reversed our positions, climbed on top, and started punching him until he went still. I got up, bleeding, unsure what to do. I thought about finishing him off but didn't shoot. I ran to my car and grabbed a flashlight. I scanned the woods but saw no one. I wrapped a towel around my wounds and tried to calm down. After a minute, I went back. I returned to where both men had fallen, but they were gone. No blood, no footprints, no sound, nothing. My mind went wild. I had shot one, knocked the other out. Where did they go? Did someone drag them off? Terrified, I fired a few shots into the trees and ran to my car. I drove off, leaving everything behind. As I got a mile out, windows cracked open. I suddenly heard laughter. More than one voice. It made no sense. I sped up, heart racing. To this day, I don't know what happened that night, but I still have scars from the fight, a reminder that it was all real. The part that still messes with me the most? I never saw their faces, just blackness where their features should have been. A friend of mine and I made a habit of camping twice every month ever since I finally got a reliable car that could handle getting us out to more remote parts of our region. We had a trip lined up for this past weekend and picked a pretty secluded place we checked out the week before. During that earlier trip, we didn't come across a single person within a mile radius of our site. Friday night came and we got there and pitched our gear. This story happened the next night on Saturday. It was around 9 in the evening. The sun had set long before, and the moon wasn't up yet, so it was completely dark. Other than what the fire illuminated around us, we couldn't see a thing. Out of nowhere, we heard a man screaming. We went silent and listened, exchanging worried glances. At first, we thought maybe it was some drunk guy out there messing around a little too much. But quickly, we could tell it wasn't the type of yelling that came from partying. It didn't even sound like someone who'd just gotten injured. It came across like someone who was broken down, just full of rage, pain, and hopelessness. I want to pause to remind you, this is 9 p.m., no light anywhere, out in the sticks, about 5 miles from where a phone would even start picking up a signal. We hadn't come across anyone in a long time. The yelling just kept going on. Felt like it lasted for ages, but in reality, it was probably a solid 5 minutes. We had no clue how to make sense of it. I started getting super anxious. We pulled together anything that could work as a weapon and tried to think through what could explain that kind of screaming while keeping an eye on the woods surrounding us. About 15 intense minutes went by, filled with paranoid energy, and I nearly toppled over in surprise when I saw the beam of a flashlight and the soft glow of a lantern coming closer into our camp. Before I even saw who it was, I asked, "How's it going?" in the most neutral tone I could manage. The guy responded quickly but kind of flat, no emotion in his voice, and asked if we could do him a favor. That all depended on what he wanted, we both said, keeping whatever makeshift weapons we had within arm's reach. He then asked if he could warm up by the fire for a bit. Given it was just one guy and there were 2 of us, plus the pile of gear nearby we could grab fast, we agreed to let him stick around. After a few seconds of awkward quiet, I asked him what the hell was going on out there. He told us he was camped a ways down the trail with a friend of his, but his friend had snapped and tried to kill him. Wait, what? That was out of my mouth before I could even really register the words. Was that screaming from earlier his friend? The man nodded slowly, staring into the flames. Then he started explaining. They had come out earlier that day and were just chilling, but then his buddy lost it. He started yelling nonstop, just wouldn't stop screaming, and then suddenly came at him. The guy said he tried to calm him down, told him to take it easy, but the other guy kept coming. Things turned violent. He said it felt like he was about to die. So he grabbed his keys, some lights, and ran for it. The guy was chasing him as he took off, and he didn't know what to do now. They didn't have any guns or anything like that, just a hatchet. My friend and I looked at each other, completely taken aback. Then something hit me hard. Wait, he chased you? Like he's headed this way? The man just gave a slow nod again. Right on cue, like something straight from a horror flick come to life, we heard more screaming. It was maybe 30 or 40 feet off the main path, close to camp. I just want your balance, Keith. Just give me your balance, Keith. Keith, where are you? I've never heard someone make that kind of noise before. It didn't even sound fully human. It was a disturbing, animalistic wail that hit a strange balance between high-pitched and low, growling tones. You could hear in the voice that this person was completely unhinged. And the way he said the guy's name, switching from this creepy drawn-out tone to quick, barking grunts, was spine-chilling. We shut off all lights, got dead quiet, and listened. Somehow, whoever it was didn't notice us and kept walking past the camp, screaming the whole time as he continued down the path. We ended up talking with Keith for hours. All the while, we kept hearing that screaming getting more and more distant. Turned out they'd each taken about 5 grams of mushrooms earlier that day. Keith's buddy, Aaron, was a coworker. Everything was fine for the first few hours. But then, out of nowhere, Aaron lost control. He apparently got it into his head that he could take Keith's good trip away by killing him. The screaming got further away over the next 2 hours. By now, it was getting close to 11 p.m., and the moon was starting to peek out. It had dropped below freezing. According to Keith, Aaron had no coat or flashlight on him. My friend and I were in no condition to drive. The trail was icy and snowy, and even if we got to the road, it would take a couple miles on slick highway to reach a spot with cell reception. Keith was still feeling the effects of the mushrooms and weed, so he couldn't really drive either. We had to hope the guy wandered far enough off and wouldn't find his way back. But he did. Oh, he definitely did. After almost an hour of silence, we suddenly heard someone yelling again, this time even closer, maybe 30 to 50 feet from camp. Hey, help, I'm lost. Please, help me, I'm lost. We could tell by the voice and direction that he was walking toward our camp from the woods. We told Keith to hide just in case. Then we got up and met the man. I had my 12-gauge shotgun in hand and my .40 caliber pistol on my belt. My friend had his AK-style rifle and 2 holstered 9mm handguns. We turned our flashlights to full brightness and aimed them right at the man's face. He was huge, around 6 feet 3 inches and close to 300 pounds. We talked to him for a bit and figured he seemed calm enough to deal with. He said he had blacked out, didn't remember anything, and that he and Keith had had some kind of argument. He seemed really sorry about everything. We walked him back to his site. After that, we came back and told Keith that Aaron appeared okay now. We told him if anything weird happened again, he should scream and we'd come help. In the end, it turned out all right. We made a new friend out of Keith. I even got his number to make sure he got home the next day to his wife and kids safely. And we're actually planning another camping trip with him sometime soon. But Aaron, the guy who stumbled around the forest screaming like a madman, maybe even carrying a hatchet, planning to take out his buddy just to hijack his good trip? Whatever dark thoughts were bouncing around his tripping brain. For the love of all that's good, I hope we never see that guy again. Oldest of its kind in the southeastern part of the country, stretching across nearly 2 million acres of untouched backwoods. A place considered by many to offer the best outdoor trips you could hope for. Some say the name Ouachita comes from a blend of native words meaning faraway big hunt. As you might expect, during the cooler months, the whole place swells with camouflage gear, fluorescent vests, and blaze orange hunting hats. Now, my buddies and I, we were never the hunting type. We're more suburban than anything. I mean, before we took a trip to Arkansas, the furthest south I'd gone was Delaware. So yeah, chopping up wild game in the forest was definitely not our idea of leisure. But then we found out that there's a stretch of time right in the heat of summer when hunting in the Ouachita is completely off limits. We were thrilled. That meant whole areas of the forest would be nearly empty, pretty much ours to explore, or at least that's what we believed. We spent 3 days driving, about 7 to 8 hours each day, all the way from our hometown of Lowell, Massachusetts to southern Arkansas. With nearly 1,500 miles to cover, doing it in one shot wasn't even something we considered. So, we turned the trip into a small road adventure, stopping off in Jersey, Richmond, and Memphis. Honestly, I could see myself moving to Richmond just for the sweet chili barbecue sauce. I'd seen it on some travel food show once and always wanted to try it. It lived up to the hype. But back to the forest. By the time we pulled into Ouachita National Forest, we were more than ready to forget city life, ditch cell service, and embrace whatever nature had to offer, which is a fancy way of saying we planned to get real drunk around a big fire, singing old flogging Molly songs at full volume. And we did just that. A bit too much, actually, because after only 2 out of our planned 4 nights camping, we ran out of beer and cigarettes. And it wasn't a great time for that to happen either. The sun was already low in the sky when we realized the coolers were nearly empty. Just 3 unopened cans left between the 4 of us. Outlaw Spirits, the nearest spot to restock, was nothing more than a crooked wooden building just outside a small place called Mason Ridge. Took us nearly 3 hours on foot to get there. But honestly, totally worth it. Walking into that store felt like entering some backwoods museum. The walls were lined with mounted animals. Black bears, bucks, turkeys, raccoons, even a bobcat or two. Looked like a mix between a liquor store and a hunting cabin. The owner, a guy named Dale, showed us around, pointing out a few homemade wines and spirits. He even let us try samples of some of the stronger stuff. We'd gone in thinking we'd just grab a 6-pack and ended up leaving with our packs full, bottles of Dale's brew, some spicy jerky, and a bottle each of something he called Smokestack Stout. A deep, dark beer brewed in state and aged in oak barrels. 11% ABV, no joke. Strong enough to make your knees feel wobbly after half a bottle. By the time we were close to camp again, the sky was painted orange and pink. Our legs were shot from hours of hiking, but we didn't care. We were sipping on that stout, munching jerky, and feeling good. One of us passed around a bag of chips too, hoping it would help soak up some of the alcohol. At that point, nature started calling pretty loudly. We'd been drinking for a while, and everyone's bladder was full. So every so often, we'd pause on the trail while someone wandered off to find a private spot to relieve themselves. When my turn came, I handed off my drink, stepped off the path, and pushed through some ferns and saplings until I found a spot that seemed out of sight. I was zipping back up, getting ready to head back, when I heard something odd. Voices, not loud, more like whispers, mixed with the crunch of footsteps over dry leaves. And for some reason, half-drunk me thought it'd be a good idea to say hi, maybe share a few drinks, swap campfire stories, make some friends. But the people making those noises weren't looking for company. I walked through a thick patch of brush into a tiny clearing and immediately regretted it. Standing there were 4, maybe 5 rough-looking guys. They turned as I stepped in, startled and glaring. They wore tattered clothes, ripped jeans, grimy boots, and patched-up jackets. Every one of them held something dangerous. Rusty knives, a couple machetes, and one guy had what looked like a homemade spiked bat. Something right out of a nightmare. And there, in the middle of them, tied up on the dirt floor, was a young woman. She couldn't have been older than her early 20s. Her face and arms were bruised and scraped, and she made this sound through the cloth in her mouth that I still hear in the worst of my dreams. I froze. I couldn't move. My eyes wouldn't look away from her until I noticed one of the men, the one with the spiked club, staring directly at me. He didn't yell. He didn't charge. He just raised one finger and pressed it to his lips. I turned and walked away. Not fast. I didn't want to seem like I was running. But after 10 steps, My panic took over and I sprinted back toward the trail. When my friends saw my face, they didn't ask. They just started running too. None of us spoke a word until we'd put at least a mile between us and that clearing. One of my buddies threw up from all the beer and jerky, collapsing against a rock, breathing heavy. When we finally stopped, I told them everything. And of course, we argued. One friend wanted to call the police right then and there. Another said we had to get out of the woods immediately, which meant driving even though we were all tipsy. Getting pulled over drunk in Arkansas would mean jail time. We argued until we agreed. Call first, then drive until we found a cheap motel and lay low. The call was made. The location was given along with every detail I could remember. But we never heard anything back. No follow-up, no visit, nothing. I think about that night more than I'd like to admit. I wonder if they ever found that girl. If she's safe now, far from that place. Maybe she got rescued, maybe she got away. I pray that she did. But sometimes, when the world feels dark and quiet, I feel like I know the truth. That she never made it out of those woods. That even if she did survive, a piece of her stayed behind. Lost in that clearing, taken from her by something too awful to understand. Back in the summer of 2010, a few buddies and I planned a short camping trip in a wooded area a few miles outside our hometown. It was called Fox Ridge Woods. Even though it wasn't that big, it gave us a good chance to get away from the usual noise and crowd. Life in the city can be fun, but after a while it starts to feel like too much. So we were all really looking forward to some time out in the quiet. But as the trip got closer, things started falling apart. Bit by bit, each person started backing out. One had a sick relative, another was tight on money, and some just lost interest. In the end, it was just the two of us who decided to go. So one bright morning in late July, we hopped on a train and headed toward the woods. The weather couldn't have been better. Not a single cloud in the sky, with a nice breeze that made the walk through the forest much more pleasant than we'd thought. It didn't take us long to find a decent spot. It was shaded and next to a small creek we could use for washing up and drinking. The only downside was that it was a bit too exposed. Anyone walking nearby could easily see us, and we weren't exactly hidden. Later that afternoon, worn out from the walk, we decided to build a small fire to cook a quick meal. Now, a fire is pretty much a basic part of camping, but it brings attention. The smell of smoke and food can travel far in the woods. It's like lighting a beacon saying, "Hey, someone's over here," and we knew that. So we weren't all that surprised when a few local guys showed up and wandered over to say hi. They acted polite at first, but, and maybe this sounds paranoid, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I got from them. The strange how sometimes you just feel something isn't right. Whether it's how someone talks or how they glance at each other, your brain picks up on little signs. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something felt off. The way they asked certain questions, or maybe the way they stood, it all gave me the impression they weren't being honest. Once they finally walked off and were out of hearing range, my friend quietly said we should move our camp. He's usually the more jumpy one, the one I'm always telling to calm down. But that time I agreed right away. Maybe we were overreacting, but sometimes it's better to be cautious. Even though we were both beat and a little buzzed from the drinks, we gathered our gear, put out the fire with water, and started looking for a better place. Thankfully, we didn't have to go too far. We found a thickly wooded hill that gave us more cover. It also had a partial view of our old campsite if you walked about a minute from where we set up. Not direct line of sight, but enough to keep an eye on the general area, at least during the day. Once we got settled again, we lit another small fire and cooked up some instant noodles in our mess tins. We drank more, smoked a bit, and sat around chatting about nothing until we couldn't keep our eyes open anymore. Then we crawled into our makeshift shelters to sleep. I must have passed out fast, because I don't even remember falling asleep. The next thing I knew, I was opening my eyes in total darkness, with the sound of a car engine revving in the distance. First, I was just irritated. I had a pounding headache, felt like garbage, and just wanted to go back to sleep. But the sound didn't stop. The engine kept revving, getting louder, closer. That's when I knew something wasn't right. My gut told me I should check it out. By the time I got to the edge of the hill, I started hearing voices. Could have been just some bored teens messing around with a stolen car. But again, better to be safe than sorry. I peeked through the trees toward our old campsite, and that's when I saw flashlight beams dancing around. The car had been driven straight down the forest path to where we had been earlier. Someone was down there, clearly looking for us. I didn't even think. I just moved. I ran back to wake up my friend. I probably had to explain it 3 times before it sank in. He was just as groggy and confused as I'd been. But when he realized what I was saying, he got up quick. We kicked dirt over the fire and got our things together. We had a small pair of binoculars with us, so we grabbed them and crept back to the edge to get a better view of what was happening below. What we saw scared us stiff. Thanks to the flashlights they shone on each other, we could see what they had in their hands. Bats, hammers, even what looked like a coil of rope. They were yelling and swearing, furious that they hadn't found us. I don't even want to imagine what they were planning. All we had to defend ourselves were 2 pocket knives. If they had decided to check the surrounding woods, they would have found us quickly. And I honestly don't know if I'd still be here to tell the story. Luckily for us, they didn't bother. Maybe they were drunk too, or just didn't care enough to search. Either way, we were incredibly lucky. We took turns, one keeping watch while the other quietly packed our things. Down at our old site, the group was stomping around, smashing the fire pit we'd built, throwing our leftover stuff around. They were clearly upset we'd slipped away. They didn't look like they were planning to leave anytime soon, which meant we were stuck. If we tried to make a run for it with our packs, and they spotted us, there'd be no chance of getting away, not with them having a vehicle. So we stayed up there all night. Neither of us slept. Even after we heard their car leave sometime near sunrise, we didn't relax. I was sure they might come back with more people or better lights, but thankfully that never happened. By the time we got on the train ride back later that morning, we were still shaking. The plan had been to stay out for another 2 nights. I was still a bit upset that we had to cut it short, but with people like that around, it just wasn't worth the risk. Just a reminder, whether you're traveling near home or far away, always be alert. Most people are good, but a few are not, and sometimes your instincts are the only warning you'll get. It was the summer of 1981 when the idea of taking a camping trip first came up in conversation. Dave, a close buddy of mine since high school, had been complaining about his job for weeks. He'd been stuck at this soul-draining desk job at a lone office, and our other friend Mike and I weren't doing much better. I was juggling random short-term gigs, and Mike was hauling crates at a shipping warehouse for close to minimum pay. We all just needed a break, anything to shake off the routine of work or just sitting around. But flying off to some tropical island was out of our budget, and none of us could manage the time off for a long road trip. So instead, we settled on camping. After a short talk, we chose to head to Willow Creek Forest Reserve. It was only about an hour's drive north of Lowell, which made it close enough for a simple drive, but far enough away and big enough to feel like a real escape into nature. And when I say big, I mean really big, over 3,000 acres of thick woods filled with pine and maple trees. You could spend half a day just walking across it. We knew that because we'd been there once before on a short day trip a few years earlier. So we figured spending 3 nights there in early fall would be just right before the weather got too cold and rainy. As the trip got closer, we started ironing out the details and pulling our stuff together to keep it cheap. My old dented green hatchback had just barely cleared its inspection, but it was good enough for the trip. Dave dug out his dad's dusty 2-person tent from his basement. It still worked fine despite some patched spots. Since it didn't fit all 3 of us, Mike picked up a cheap 1-man tent from an old military surplus shop. We split the rest of the gear, sleeping bags, a cooler, and a few campfire cooking items. Mike tossed in a fishing rod, and I packed a few plastic tarps just in case it rained. Dave also got hold of one of those folded trail maps from the ranger station, and with that, we figured we were ready. I remember the drive being a blast. We left late Friday afternoon with the sun still high up and played classic rock loud on the stereo. Songs like Ramblin' Man and Highway Star. About an hour later, we rolled into the forest right as the sky started to darken. The gravel lot near the entrance only had 1 other car in it. We dropped a few bucks into the envelope at the wooden pay box and picked a spot near a place called Pine Water Pond. It was a flat patch of land surrounded by tall trees and already had a fire ring in place. The ground was soft with needles, and through the trees, maybe 40 yards out, the surface of the pond was shining with the fading light. It really was beautiful. We unloaded the car, hauled our gear to the site, and started setting up. That first night was awesome. Dave got the fire going with a lighter and some wadded-up newspaper he'd brought. We cooked hot dogs on sticks and warmed a can of baked beans in a bent pot I'd found in my mom's storage closet. It wasn't fancy food, but out there it tasted better than anything we'd had in a while. After eating, we opened a few beers and sat on a big log we had dragged over to the flames. I leaned in, just watching the fire, and felt everything stressful just fade away. I remember thinking, this is exactly what I needed. The next day, we went hiking. We picked a short trail, about 3 miles, that looped around the pond and led to a lookout point. The path was thin and winding, and the woods were alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and small animals darting through the brush. The view from the top made the whole walk worth it. The trees stretched out under the morning sun, and we sat for a while passing around trail mix, dumbstruck by how peaceful everything looked. As wild and untamed as it seemed, we felt completely at ease. But we were wrong to feel safe. Sunday morning started out the same. We went on a longer hike that day and got back to camp in the late afternoon, exhausted but happy. Dave dozed off in the tent while I collected more wood. After we ate, right around sunset, we decided to turn in early since we were worn out from walking all day. With Mike's little tent just a dark shape nearby, I zipped up ours and crawled into my sleeping bag. Dave was already out cold, snoring softly next to me. The woods grew still. Now and then, I'd hear an animal in the distance, but nothing out of the ordinary. I eventually fell asleep too, but I woke up cold. Something about the air inside the tent felt off, wet and chilly. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on, and noticed the flap was wide open. I sat up and shined the beam around. Dave's sleeping bag was empty. His boots were gone too. His coat, though, was still balled up in the corner. I checked my watch. It was just past 4:30 a.m. I figured he had gone to relieve himself and would be back any minute. I lay there waiting. Nothing. No footsteps. No sounds at all. A few minutes passed, and I sat up again, turned the flashlight back on, and moved to the tent's entrance. I peeked outside. It was pitch black. The trees seemed to eat up the light from my flashlight. I waved it around, slowly, side to side. Nothing. I felt a little silly. Was I really getting scared just because my friend went to pee? Still, I pulled on my boots. I figured I wouldn't get more than a few steps before running into Dave and having to laugh at myself for being jumpy. But then another thought crept into my mind. What if something was wrong? I slipped on my jacket, crawled out of the tent, and stood there, sweeping the light in a full circle. I expected to see him any second, coming back through the trees. But I didn't. I took a few steps and softly called out Dave's name, trying not to wake Mike unless I had to. I circled the clearing, shining the light into the dark woods. All I saw were shifting shadows. The feeling in my gut got worse. I called out again, louder this time. That woke Mike. I heard him stir, unzip his tent, and blink against my light. His hair was a mess, and he asked what was happening. I told him I thought Dave was missing. He asked if he might just be off somewhere nearby. I said I was serious. Once Mike realized I wasn't kidding, he threw on his boots and jacket, and we started searching. At first, we split up, circling the campsite, calling Dave's name. My flashlight swept through the trees and bushes, but nothing turned up. When we met back at camp, Mike mentioned that Dave had sleepwalked a few times as a kid. Once, he even made it into the backyard in the middle of the night. I wasn't totally convinced, but we widened the search and agreed to stay close this time. The deeper we moved into the woods, the harder it was to walk. The ground dipped, and roots kept grabbing at our feet. My shoes and socks were soaked, and it was cold enough that my hands were shaking while holding the flashlight. The forest now felt endless and unfamiliar. Still, we pressed on, yelling Dave's name. About an hour passed, maybe more. Then Mike stopped. His flashlight was aimed at a low bush. Something gray was snagged on it. We both pointed our lights. It was Dave's cap, the old faded one he'd worn every day of the trip, caught in the brambles. Neither of us moved at first. Then Mike said it didn't make sense. We kept going, calling his name. Maybe 50 feet farther, we found his socks. First one, then the other just dropped on the ground. Then came his jeans, then his shirt, then his underwear, all laid out like a path, one after the next over a stretch of maybe 60 yards. We were trying to make sense of it. Mike asked if Dave had been drinking something harder. We'd had all the beers the first night, but maybe he had snuck in a bottle or something stronger. I doubted it. And even if he had gotten secretly drunk, Dave wasn't the kind of guy to run naked through the woods for a laugh. That just wasn't him. We went back and forth a bit, still shouting for him. Then, about a minute later, we saw it. Up ahead, laying on his back, was a body, completely still with no head. The blood had soaked the ground under it. The cut where the neck should have been was clean and smooth. The rest of the body didn't have any scratches or cuts, just pale, untouched skin, glowing in our flashlights. I froze. I couldn't move or talk. Even now, thinking back, it's strange to say, but for a second, it didn't seem real. Not like a dream, just wrong, unreal, like a fake body in a horror movie. The color of the skin, the way the blood had dried, it didn't seem possible. I'd never seen a dead body before, especially not like that. I think Mike had a similar reaction. He wouldn't even admit it was Dave. He started calling out for him again, louder and more desperate. He was walking around, yelling, crying, but wouldn't even look at the body. I couldn't speak at first. My flashlight was shaking in my hand, but everything added up. The size, the build, the clothes. I forced myself to say, "Mike, it's him. It's Dave." Mike just shook his head, still shouting Dave's name, refusing to believe it. He kept pacing in circles, hands on his head, until he finally broke down crying. My legs felt like they'd give out, but I stayed up and walked over to hold him. Once his sobs settled into quiet breaths, I said, "We have to do something. I know this is horrible, but we have to." He nodded. After a minute or two, we hurried back toward camp, running when the terrain allowed. I don't know why we ran. It's not like it would help, but maybe it made us feel like we were. A few years ago, a couple of mates and I caught a night bus from Manchester to a small town called Langford in the Southern Highlands. We were heading off on a week of wild camping. The key difference between wild camping and the usual kind is the lack of tents. Wild campers typically don't bring them. Instead, they carry ponchos or tarps to rig up a simple shelter, then sleep straight on the dirt. Yeah, it can be miserable at times, but it's part of the challenge. Toughens you up. It's around 5 o'clock in the morning. We've barely closed our eyes on the bus, and now we're out in the countryside trying to find our way. Naturally, we mess up almost immediately. We've got a trek of over 6 miles ahead of us. Should take nearly 9 hours on foot, and within minutes we've already veered off course. I can't believe we managed to go the wrong way so soon. It's not even properly light yet, around 5:30 a.m., and we already look like a strange bunch. We spot a cyclist and flag him down to ask for directions. He's typical of the locals, cheerful and helpful, and sets us back on the right path. Not long after, we turn a bend and see a war monument up ahead. It becomes our reference point. We're greeted by a chorus of distant bird calls and decide to drop our gear on the benches near the memorial to take a break. The monument stands at a fork in the road, and for a second, I think about how people used to be buried at crossroads after taking their own lives. It's a grim thought. Golden sunlight pours over the road as we press on southwest toward a small place called Gorton Bridge. The pavement narrows, and we keep having to step into the road to keep pace. A low hill rises to our left, and we spot a rabbit, the first one of the trip. Feels like a good sign. We joke around, pretending to aim at it with invisible rifles, making dumb popping sounds and rubbing our stomachs. It notices us and bolts into a hedge. We trudge on under the weight of our bags, passing a garish sign with fake-looking swords stuck through it, pointing to some lodge or house. The writing is in Old Scots Gaelic. Only in this country. One of us mutters. We finally get to Gorton Bridge and make our way across it. There's an old blacksmith's cottage near the base, and we climb a mild incline past the local high school until we reach a dirt road. We've done well for time. The fields are empty, no workers in sight, just flocks of livestock. The farmhouse is in excellent shape, but the shed next door looks run down, probably full of bats. Young sheep and their mothers spot us and scatter nervously. We sneak past the shed and clamber over 2 fences to avoid a huge waste tank. That puts us face to face with another obstacle, an electric fence. Is that live? Someone asks. I follow the cable with my eyes and spot it connected to a battery unit. Not great. It's too tall to jump, and our bags make crawling underneath impossible. I imagine the horror of being zapped in a sensitive area. I find a thick fallen branch, careful to avoid the fresh cow dung around it like it's a field of mines, and drag it to the fence. It's solid enough to pin the wire down. As I step over, I hear it buzz faintly. We cut across 2 fields, having to scale a fence between them. The slow work with our loads. I take out my phone to film us climbing the first steep hill. Breathing gets heavier. Our packs suddenly feel twice as heavy, and we lean into the slope for balance. Every step takes effort. At the steepest bit, we fall silent. No more jokes, just pushing through the climb. I start to feel hungry, and soon our planned rest stop comes into view. It's close to the spot we camped at during a previous trip. We drop our gear and take a well-earned break. My friend Liam pulls off his shirt, soaked in sweat. I notice steam lifting from his shoulders. "Mate, you're steaming," our other friend Josh exclaims. We laugh, sit back, and pull out snacks and smokes. Josh and I both have these oat biscuits with soft cheese. We share coffee heated up with Josh's jet boil. That little stove ends up being one of the most valuable things we bring with us all week. Liam changes into dry clothes and eyeballs a tin of pre-cooked breakfast, reading the label out loud. It's much cooler in the shade. We lean back, chewing and smoking, taking in the view. It's 7 a.m., but with no sleep, it feels much later. It's mildly disorienting. We estimate reaching our next stop, Lockhalder, around 10 o'clock. Liam isn't convinced. That early mistake was a bad omen, and he's still waiting for something else to go wrong. Sure enough, after cutting across hilly terrain for a while, we reach a small cluster of homes that we'd planned to use as a reference. We debate what route to take and eventually opt to cross a cow field, mostly because it's got the only fence we can safely get over. Plus, it avoids another electric one, which looks way nastier. Midway across, I realize the cows are watching us. Usually, that's nothing to worry about, but the sheer number of them and the look in their eyes makes me slow down. "They're staring at us," I mutter. "They're just curious," Josh replies. They start moving toward us, slowly at first, then spreading out like a front line. They're definitely coming closer. Josh insists they're only being nosy. Then they pick up speed. Their trot turns into this awkward, lumpy run. Liam halts, stepping backward. "They're charging," he yells. I stop too and glance around. There's a small paddock with electric fencing nearby. "Run!" Liam shouts. We try to sprint, but our heavy bags make it more of a slow lurch. I've already decided I'd rather be shocked than trampled. "Don't run!" Josh yells. That shout triggers something in my brain. I stop, spin around, and lift my arms wide to look bigger. Liam copies me. The charging cows slow down. Some come to a full stop. We hear someone shouting in the distance. It's the farmer. He's waving and telling us to move toward the gate along the side. Josh seems more confident now. "Just keep moving," he says calmly. We bunch together and edge toward the gate. The cows crowd around, jostling to get closer. A few try to climb over others for a better view. I keep muttering to myself, "This is fine. We're okay. They're just cows. Totally fine." Inside, I'm shaking. I climb over the wooden gate just as the farmer walks up. "They're just nosy," he tells us. "If you'd gone across the field..." "Well," he trails off. "Can you point us toward the main road?" Josh asks. "Yeah, just follow this track until you hit the tarmac, then right at the junction. Don't go through the farm again. Stay on the road, and it'll take you where you need to go." "Thanks, man," we say. He nods, more irritated than curious, and goes on his way. Whenever I retell this story, people usually laugh. I get it. 3 city lads freaking out over cows is funny, but it really did scare the hell out of us. Especially once we got home and found out how common it is for cows to seriously injure or kill walkers. Turns out cows are more dangerous than sharks. Most of the incidents happen just like ours. Someone decides to walk straight across a field instead of sticking to the edge or finding another route, and they get swarmed. The UK's health and safety executive even had to reissue a warning to farmers not to let cows with calves into public access fields, because it's that serious. That's not some random stat either. It's pulled straight from an article I found in The Independent. So yeah, next time you think about cutting across a nice green pasture, just make sure it's empty first. Otherwise, you might get more than you bargained for. I'd always been someone who felt at home outside, and my friend Dan was just like me. We'd been close since we were kids, back when we used to skip school to explore the wooded ravines near where we lived in Mississauga. Over the years, that hobby became something of a tradition. Every summer, we'd pick a spot, pack light, and head out for a weekend of camping. As time passed, though, we started pushing ourselves more. What used to feel exciting became routine. So we made up a phrase for what we were doing: extreme camping. Though I'm sure plenty of other people had come up with that too. Basically, it meant no tents, no cooking gear, just a tarp, a sleeping sheet, and whatever we could carry. We brought some food, but never much, so by the 3rd day we'd usually be fishing or scavenging if we wanted to eat. It wasn't supposed to be easy. That was the whole idea. When we were both 25, we picked Quetico Provincial Park way up in northwestern Ontario for a 7-day trip out in the wilderness. We hit the ground running. The first day we hiked nearly 20 kilometers from the trail entrance, winding through thick stands of pine and aspen. The weather was cool with broken cloud cover. We made camp by a slow-moving creek. I slung my tarp over a low branch while Dan searched for wood. That night we had a bit of jerky, boiled water, and let the campfire burn down while stars slowly filled the sky. The only sounds were wind in the trees and maybe an owl once or twice. We liked it like that, no distractions, no people, just us and nature. The second day wasn't as easy. The ground was all stones and exposed roots, and we had to scale a pretty steep ridge to keep heading north. By lunchtime, my legs were aching, and Dan, who's about 6 inches taller than me, kept getting ahead. His long stride made it easy for him. That night, we camped on a flat patch of mossy ground, and the cold kept seeping through my sleeping sheet. I woke up once when I heard a stick snap and grabbed for the knife I kept at my hip. Turned out it was just a deer passing by. By the 3rd day, we were in the zone. Our packs were lighter and food was nearly gone, but we were used to that. A bit of hunger always sharpened the senses. That afternoon, Dan managed to catch a little trout in a shallow stream, using some thread and a makeshift hook. We cooked it on a small fire, tore the flaky meat with our fingers, and drank water straight from the rushing stream. Honestly, it was better than any bottled stuff. We glanced at the map from time to time, but mostly we just let the woods decide where we camped next. Quetico's massive, hundreds of thousands of acres of forest and lakes, and we were deep in it, far from any signs of roads or patrol stations. But that was the point. No help, no fallback, just the trees and whatever we carried. The 4th day started like the others. Dan was already up, rolling up his sleeping sheet when I crawled out from under my tarp. We shared the last handful of trail mix, hoisted our gear, and headed north. The forest was thick, and we didn't speak much. All we could hear were our footsteps crunching through the undergrowth. Around midday, we stopped at a narrow stream to refill our bottles. I splashed water on my face, and that's when Dan tapped me on the shoulder. "You see that?" he asked, pointing off into the distance. At first, I didn't know what he meant, but then I saw it too. Something in the woods that looked too straight, too clean to be natural. We grabbed our gear and walked toward it, pushing through brush. The trees opened up, and standing there was a building. More specifically, a chapel. Its walls were faded wood, warped and weathered like it had been there since the 1800s. The roof was steep and covered in moss and old pine needles, with a rust-covered cross leaning slightly at the peak. Another smaller cross dangled from the entrance, which had been boarded and sealed with thick chain and a big lock. There were no windows, no steeple either, just a dull wooden structure half swallowed by the woods. I remember looking at Dan and saying something like, "What the hell is this?" But he didn't answer. He was already unfolding the map on the ground and tracing our route. But the map showed nothing. Not even a mark to indicate an old ruin or anything remotely human-made. Nothing for miles around. It felt odd. Like, how does a building like this exist without roads, without trails, and far from any old towns? Dan packed the map up and kept his eyes on the church. "Let's go see it," he said. We circled the building, stepping over thick roots and ducking low branches. That front door and its rusted lock were the first things I noticed up close. The chains were thick, and it didn't look like anyone had been here in decades. Then, around the side, we found a break in the wooden boards. A hole low to the ground where the wood had either rotted or been scratched away. It wasn't large, but big enough for a person to crawl through. "Probably some animal's den," Dan said, peering inside. He was probably right. But then he dropped his pack and got down on all fours. "You're seriously going in?" I asked. Dan just replied, "Come on, aren't you curious?" Of course I was, but I thought we could just shine our flashlights through the hole and see enough. I even suggested it, but Dan ignored me, wriggling through the opening without hesitation. I wasn't going to let him go in alone, so I took off my pack and crawled after him. The wooden edges scraped my sides, and the inside air hit me. It was damp and smelled stale. Inside, we stood slowly. The floor was compact dirt, scattered with old leaves. No pews, no altar, just blank walls. Except for one thing. In the middle of the floor was a thick metal trapdoor, halfway buried under soil and dried leaves. It had thick bolts around the edges, and a heavy chain twisted over it. A rusted lock sealed it shut. Dan walked up to it, knelt and tugged on the chains. They clanked but didn't budge. "What the hell would need to be locked up like this?" I muttered. Dan stood and said maybe it wasn't a chapel anymore. Maybe it was some kind of stash spot. The idea sounded crazy, but so did the whole situation. He speculated out loud. Maybe it was hidden money or stolen goods. Maybe a criminal had buried something here and sealed it tight. I wasn't convinced. I told him it could just as easily be hazardous materials or something no one wanted found. But Dan wasn't listening. His eyes had this weird focus, like his brain had already made the decision. "We need to open it," he said, moving toward the gap in the wall. "Let's find something to bust the chain." I shouted for him to stop and grabbed his arm, but he shook me off and slid out. Outside, Dan paced around, scanning the ground. I asked what he was looking for, though I already knew. "I need something heavy," he muttered. "A rock big enough to smash a padlock." But there wasn't anything nearby, just pine needles, some twigs, and a few small stones. I told him he was being reckless. If that trapdoor really was hiding something, it might not be safe, or it might belong to someone who wouldn't take kindly to thieves. But again, he didn't listen. I told him if it really was a stash, it probably belonged to someone dangerous, and breaking in would be a death sentence. But Dan was locked in. I'd never seen him like that. "I'll walk till I find something," he said, disappearing into the woods. That's when I lost it. I chased after him, grabbed his shoulder, and spun him around. I asked what the hell he was thinking, and he shoved me. We ended up scuffling, pushing each other until I got him up against a tree and held him there. I yelled at him to snap out of it, and suddenly he did, like he'd woken up. He stopped pushing and stepped back. We were both breathing hard. His face had gone pale, and sweat was dripping from his forehead. I asked again, "What was going on in your head back there?" Dan looked shaken, said he didn't know, said he couldn't stop thinking about that door, like he had to see what was under it, like it was the real adventure. He rubbed his head like it was pounding. I crouched beside him and waited for the adrenaline to wear off. Eventually he nodded, and we went back to grab our gear. We left that building behind. The rest of the trip was different. We camped a couple more nights, stuck to the plan. Hiking, scavenging, boiling water, but something had shifted. That joy we usually felt out there was gone. Dan was quieter, but back to normal. And by the time we made it back to Mississauga, he was joking again. We even had a nickname for the place, the Chain Shack, and it became a funny story over drinks. But when I thought about it alone, it didn't feel funny. Not one bit. Back home, life went on. I returned to my office job. Dan got back to working at a restaurant. We still hung out, still planned trips. And we always brought up that old chapel. But it was always jokes, always something to laugh about. Remember when you stopped us from getting rich? Dan would joke. I'd laugh too. But deep down, I hadn't stopped thinking about it. The years passed. Dan never acted off again. We did other trips, smaller ones, but we never talked about going back. In fact, we avoided that whole area. Sometimes I'd search forums online, trying to find anything about a church deep in Quetico. Nothing ever came up. No records, no legends, nothing. It was like that building wasn't real. That weekend, we headed out on a camping trip to Lenwood Forest Preserve. It was me, Casey, and Joel, just the three of us wanting to escape the city for a couple of days. We'd been planning it for a while, gathered up all our stuff, and drove out from Queens late Friday. The forest was quiet when we arrived, and we picked a spot close to one of the smaller ponds. A place we chose off an old hiking app since it wasn't near any of the busier paths. By the time our tent was up and a small fire going, the sun had mostly dipped behind the hills. That first night turned out great. We had some grilled sausages, a couple of cold drinks, and finally had a real catch-up session after not seeing each other for ages. The next morning, we figured we'd explore. It was almost noon and we didn't really have a set route. We just picked a trail and started walking. Joel had his phone out taking pictures of every weird mushroom and lumpy rock, while Casey kept rambling about finding a good place to stop for a snack. I was mostly tagging along, half paying attention while they argued about whether or not mountain lions lived in New York. After hiking a while, the woods started to thin, and that's when we found a small pond that wasn't on the app's map. It was quiet, maybe a bit over 100 feet across. Right there by the edge, half hidden by trees, stood an old wooden shed. Nothing impressive. The wood was sun-faded, grayish-brown, and cracked in places like it had been there for a really long time. The roof sloped awkwardly, like it might cave in soon, and the single window didn't even have glass. Just a square hole with a shredded bit of cloth hanging inside. The door wasn't locked, just hanging partly open, creaking gently whenever the wind hit it. Casey said it looked deserted. Joel nodded, but I wasn't convinced. Something about it felt wrong. Still, we were curious, so we walked up to it. Inside, it was dim. The sunlight coming through the window barely reached the corners. The place smelled musty, like old dirt and damp wood. There wasn't much there, just a rough table in the middle, a few broken chairs in a pile near the back, and some bent rusty nails sticking out of the walls. The table caught my eye first. It was rough and scarred, and covered in dark, uneven spots, deep stains that looked almost black in the shadows. I ran a hand over one of them, but I couldn't tell what it was. Joel said maybe it was dried blood. Casey pointed at the walls and said maybe he was right. They were lined with hooks, about a dozen, all screwed in at different levels. Some were bent, others rusted, but none of them had anything hanging on them. It made sense to say it was a hunter's shack. Maybe someone used it for cleaning animals or storing tools. That's what we told ourselves anyway. It felt creepy, but not impossible to explain. We kept poking around for another few minutes. Casey nudged the dirty curtain with his boot. Joel snapped a picture of the table, saying he'd show it to his cousin who hunted upstate. I just stood near the door, ready to get out. The place gave me the chills. Once we stepped back outside, I remember being glad to breathe the open air again. We started walking back, figuring it was time to get food. That's when Casey tripped. He was ahead of us near the edge of the shack when his foot caught on something. He wobbled but didn't fall. Joel and I came up to him, and there it was, something metal sticking just above the ground, barely noticeable unless you were looking right at it. Dull, rusted, and partly buried under packed soil. At first I thought it was a blade or maybe a tool someone had dropped and left behind. Casey knelt down and brushed away some of the dirt, but the thing wouldn't budge. Said it was stuck. Joel passed me his water bottle and told us to dig it out. I grabbed a nearby stick and started scraping. Casey used his hands, tossing away clumps of dirt. As we cleared more away, it got bigger. It definitely wasn't a tool. We saw curved edges, then realized it was hollow. After maybe 10 minutes, we had most of it uncovered. It was a helmet or something like a helmet. Heavy metal, maybe iron. Old, pitted, and rusted, but still solid. It came to a point at the top like a rounded spike, and in the front were two long slits shaped like jagged crosses. Not neat crosses, they looked carved out roughly, like someone had bashed them in with something sharp. The thing looked out of place, didn't belong in the woods. Gave me the creeps just staring at it. Joel stepped back, asking what it was. Casey picked it up, actually grunting from the weight, and held it up. He said something like, "Looks like a medieval hood or something," and laughed. But made of iron. I didn't think it had anything to do with costumes. Nothing about it felt fake. It seemed older, heavier, like it wasn't made just to look scary. Maybe it was meant to be used. Casey turned it over and sniffed it, said it smelled like wet metal and earth, then grinned and said, "I'm gonna try it on." "No, you're not," Joel snapped, grabbing it from him. He plopped down on the ground, wiped his palms on his jeans, and said, "At least clean it off first." Casey shrugged, but I could tell he was serious about wearing it later. I didn't like that. The helmet made me uneasy, like it was looking back through those cross slits. I didn't say anything, though. Didn't want to sound weird. We ended up leaving it there by the shack and started hiking back. The walk was quiet. None of us said much. We just kept moving, eyes mostly on the path ahead. By the time we got back to the campsite, the sun had dipped low. We lit a fire, cooked some pasta on the little stove, and ate it with a jar of red sauce. Talked some. The helmet came up again. Joel said it was probably a prop, something left behind from a low-budget movie or something. Casey didn't agree, said it was too heavy, and why would someone bury a prop anyway? I didn't have a good answer. I just kept thinking about those stains on the table and the hooks in the wall. It didn't feel like some hunter's place anymore, not with that thing outside. We dropped the topic and finished dinner. Sat around the fire until it burned down to glowing bits. Sometime after dark, maybe around 9:30, Casey stood up. The sky was black. No moon, just a scatter of stars and the soft orange flicker from the embers. He didn't say anything, just grabbed his flashlight and wandered into the trees. "Where's he going?" I asked. He didn't reply, just kept walking. Joel looked at me. "He's going for that helmet." I nodded. We could have stopped him, but we didn't. Casey was gone longer than he should have been. It wasn't that far to the shack and back. Joel started pacing, mumbling about how stupid it was to go alone like that. I sat by the fire, poking at it with a stick, trying not to picture that thing sitting in the dark. When Casey came back, he didn't have the helmet. He looked pale, wouldn't meet our eyes. Joel asked what happened. Casey sat on a log and stared at the dirt. "I chucked it," he said, "into the woods." Didn't like how it was looking at me. Joel asked what he meant by that, but Casey didn't answer, just shook his head. Joel kept asking, but he wouldn't say anything else. He looked rattled, like something had spooked him bad. We didn't press him after that. The fire was almost out, and none of us wanted to be up anymore. We climbed into the tent, zipped it shut, and tried to sleep. I lay there listening to the wind and Casey's uneasy breathing. That helmet kept flashing in my mind, those cross-shaped slits, staring back from wherever he threw it. I couldn't stop wondering who would make something like that. Next morning, we packed early. None of us said so, but we all wanted out. The ride back was mostly silent, just the hum of the road and the occasional passing car. We didn't bring up the shack or the helmet. Not then, not ever. But I never forgot. Now and then, I still find myself thinking about it. What it was, where it came from. I think about that old shack, those weird stains, and the empty hooks on the wall. That helmet didn't feel like hunting gear or some lost movie prop. It felt like something else, something we weren't supposed to uncover. Years later, I looked up Lenwood Forest Preserve, tried to see if anyone else had written about finding a shack like that. Nothing. Just normal trail guides and park reviews. No pond with a shed. No buried iron mask. Maybe we'd strayed farther off course than we realized. Maybe it's still out there, lying somewhere in the brush where Casey tossed it. I haven't gone back. Don't plan to. But sometimes, late at night, I still see those slits in my head, and I wonder if we walked away from something far worse than we'll ever understand. I had been counting down the days to that camping trip for a while. Me, Dylan, and Marcus, two of my closest friends, had it all mapped out. Nothing fancy, really, just a night off-grid. We picked a place way out in the middle of nowhere, somewhere out in northern Georgia, deep in the thick backwoods where the forest was dense, and the roads were nothing but dust and ruts. It was going to be simple, just us, a single tent, a small cooler of beers, and a fire pit. The kind of thing we'd done dozens of times back when we were younger. I figured it'd be a good time, and it was, at least at the start. We got there in the late afternoon. The sun was already starting to dip behind the treetops, so we worked fast, set up the tent, gathered enough firewood to last the night, and got a fire going. The evening was easy, quiet forest, still air. The fire crackled steady as we sat around it drinking and laughing. It felt right, being out there, far away from work and traffic and the noise of regular life. When I woke up the next morning, the fire had burned down to smudges of ash, and the sky was cloudy with that pale bluish light that comes just before full sunrise. Dylan and Marcus were still passed out inside the tent, so I stepped out, stretched my legs a bit, and figured I'd make some coffee to get the blood moving. I walked over to the back of my SUV to grab the coffee pot, and that's when I saw it. Right there, across the hood of my vehicle, a pelt, some kind of skinned animal hide. Not just thrown there, it was deliberately spread out, neatly placed, smoothed out like someone had taken their time. There was no fur left on it. The entire thing had been scraped clean. The flesh underneath was slick, raw, pink, and still glistening with dampness. Blood had run down over the windshield in streaks, thick, dark, and drying at the edges. I had no idea what animal it was. Could have been a small deer, maybe something like a raccoon, hard to say. The head was gone, and the legs had been chopped off roughly. Jagged cuts, like whoever did it used a dull hatchet or maybe even a rusty saw. The stench hit me hard. That strong, sour meat smell that feels like it climbs up your nose and sits there. I stood still for a second, not breathing, trying to process what I was seeing. My hands were shaking. I scanned the woods, half expecting someone to step out from behind a tree, but it was dead silent. No birds, no breeze, just me and that bloody hide on my hood. I kicked the side of the tent to wake Marcus and Dylan. They stumbled out, bleary-eyed, but as soon as they saw the mess, they both froze. Nobody said a thing. We didn't have to. We all understood that something wasn't right. We broke camp fast, tossed everything into the back of the SUV without folding or packing it properly. I used a branch to push the hide off the hood. It slapped the dirt with a wet sound. I didn't look at it again. We all jumped into the vehicle, and I hit the gas, the tires spinning up gravel and dust behind us. The whole ride back down the narrow road, I kept glancing in the mirror like something might be behind us, but there was nothing there. Still, that feeling, it stayed. That tight, cold knot in my gut. We didn't talk much on the way home. Marcus just looked out the window the whole time, and Dylan kept picking at his fingernails like he couldn't stop fidgeting. I stared at the road and tried not to think about what we'd seen. Once we got back to town, we all went our separate ways. I parked the SUV in my driveway, took out the hose, and sprayed the blood off the hood. Watched it run red down the concrete, mixing with the dirt and leaves. The whole thing didn't feel real, but I couldn't shake it either. Later that afternoon, I started asking around. Not in a panicky way, just casual, seeing if anyone had heard anything similar. I mentioned it to an older guy named Mr. Langley who worked over at the corner store. When I told him about the skinned hide, he gave me a look, kind of narrowed his eyes. He said he'd heard about things like that. Folks finding animal skins left on their porches or over their vehicles. Said it had been happening on and off for a long time, especially in the more isolated spots out in the woods. Nobody knew who did it, but some believed it was a warning. something meant for outsiders, a sign you'd crossed into land you weren't supposed to be on. Langley said it happened to him once back in 87 or 88 when he was younger and had camped way off the beaten path. Woke up to find a rabbit skinned and laid on top of his cooler. Said he packed up and never went back out that far again. That night, I didn't sleep much. I couldn't get that image out of my head, the hide all carefully arranged, the way it looked almost intentional, ritualistic even. I went online and started digging, just to see if others had been through something like this. I found post after post, people from all over telling similar stories. Skinned animals left at night, always out in remote spots. Some folks thought it was sick pranksters. Others said maybe it was hunters who'd lost their minds. A few believed it was something older than people. One guy said he saw shadows moving through the forest after it happened to him. He didn't stick around to figure out what it was. Said he drove all night, didn't stop until he hit a highway. A few mentioned strange feelings that lingered, like being watched, even after getting back home. Some talked about hearing noises in their houses later, whispers, scratching sounds, like whatever it was hadn't finished with them yet. I tried to tell myself it was all just stories, just nonsense, but deep down I didn't believe that. I don't know who or what left that skin. I don't know if we camped in the wrong place, or if we were just unlucky. Maybe we crossed some invisible line. Maybe it was just a random act. But I know one thing for sure, no animal did that. And no sane person would go through the trouble of laying it out like that. I haven't been back in the woods since. Don't plan to. Dylan and Marcus feel the same. We haven't said much about it since, but it's always there, hanging over us. I still drive that same SUV. I cleaned it, got rid of every stain. But even now, every time I walk up to it, I see it in my mind, that bloody skin stretched across the hood. Now I always keep the doors locked, even at home. I don't know if anything is coming back. I just know I'm never going back to those deep woods again. I'm originally from overseas, and I live near the Blue Ridge Mountains in Southern Virginia. I've been backpacking and camping for many years, exploring different trails around the nearby hills. My closest friend, who lives just a few miles away, often comes along on these trips. Each fall, we usually plan one big backpacking adventure lasting anywhere from a few days to a whole week. In the fall of 2020, we planned to hike a trail that crossed the mountain range to a small lake at the summit. But just before the trip, my friend had to cancel because of a work emergency. I had already taken the entire week off and had everything packed, so I decided to go by myself. Early Monday morning, I drove to a trailhead near my home and began my journey. This wasn't a normal short hiking trail you might find for a few hours of walking. These backpacking routes don't have clear paths. You have to use maps, a compass, and natural landmarks to find your way. Usually, there's a big landmark like a unique rock formation that you head toward. When you reach it, you spot your next landmark and you keep going like that. I spent the first 2 days hiking toward a mountain ridge. It got dark on the second evening, so I made camp a few hours short of the ridge. I set up my tent, started a fire, and heated up some food I'd packed. The sun had already set, and it was around 8 at night when I lay down in the tent to relax and read. I left the fire burning, planning to put it out just before going to sleep. About 20 minutes into reading, with the fire crackling outside, I suddenly heard a loud snap from a stick breaking just behind my tent. I jumped up right away. My first thought was maybe a black bear, attracted by the smell of my food from earlier. But after listening, I didn't hear any other noises. I crawled out of the tent and shined my flashlight into the trees behind me. Nothing was there. I called out firmly, hoping to scare away whatever it was. But there was no response and no sound of anything running off. It was strange because the stick snapping was very clear, definitely from something stepping on it. I stayed outside for a while, looking around carefully, then put out the fire and went inside. That night, it was hard to sleep because I kept listening for more sounds. When morning came, I was almost surprised I'd managed to sleep at all. I packed up the tent and gear and continued hiking until I reached the ridge. From there, it was a straight path to the lake. I moved quickly, wanting to get there before dark so I wouldn't have to break camp again at night. I arrived with about an hour left before sunset. The lake was stunning, definitely worth the trip. I walked all around it, taking in the quiet beauty, then pitched my tent at the tree line beside the water. While sitting by the fire, I kept hearing soft noises behind me in the trees. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but it sounded like footsteps. Still, I knew nobody else should be out here. I would have seen another tent when I circled the lake. It was too dark to see more than a few feet around me, so I couldn't really check further. About an hour later, I got inside my tent and lay down. Every few minutes I heard those faint footsteps again, though I wasn't sure if I was really hearing them or if it was my mind playing tricks. Eventually, I got so tired I fell asleep, but maybe an hour later, I woke up suddenly to the sound of someone running away from my tent. I grabbed my flashlight and rushed out, shining the beam toward where the footsteps had gone. I caught a glimpse of someone's back running off in the distance. My heart pounded fast. Looking down, I saw footprints all around my tent, like whoever it was had been walking around, searching the campsite. I hurried to get the campfire going again so I could see better, feeling scared and alone. I had nowhere to run and no one to call for help. I stayed by the fire all night, watching and listening, but I never saw or heard anything else. The next morning, I took some pictures of the lake before starting the hike back. I had planned to stay another day, but I didn't feel safe anymore, like I was being watched. Thankfully, I made it back without any more problems. But on the way home, I noticed several small things were missing from my backpack. Some food, a few tools, but I always kept my bag close. Even now, I wonder if the person who was outside my tent that night might have slipped inside and stolen from my pack while I slept. Just thinking about it still gives me chills. For the unknown in this video, Jake heads out for an overnight visit to a well-known deserted mental hospital in northern England, joined by his close friends Matt, Liam, and Simon. The hospital, called Greenfield Manor, was first built as a large country home back in the 1800s. During World War II, it was used as a detention center before being sold to the regional mental health services. Because a nearby asylum was overcrowded, Greenfield Manor was changed into a mental hospital. However, after it shut down in 1988, the building was left empty and has slowly fallen into ruin. Locals say it's haunted by the souls of those who died inside, stories that caught Jake and his friends' attention enough to make this spooky place their next adventure. It's June 12, 2017, when the group arrives around midnight, careful not to be seen as they step onto the crumbling grounds. A strange feeling settles on them. The air feels heavy, thick with something dark and heavy. This is no ordinary creepy building. Matt has been here several times before and believes it's some kind of doorway to the paranormal. Some of the things that happen here are really bad. I don't know why I keep coming back. I just want to warn you, this place is no joke, he says. Inside, the group moves slowly through the halls. The old wood creaks beneath their feet, breaking the silence, and every shadow seems to hide something just out of view. The air grows heavier, and even though they try to shake it off, the weight of the place is impossible to ignore. There's some nice woodwork here, Liam notes, surprised. I thought this would be nothing but broken walls. Oh wow, look, there's more stairs, 3 floors, Simon adds. Outside, it's about 60 degrees and still. This is where I caught some weird stuff before, Matt says, pulling out his camera gear. Last time, my camera caught something climbing the wall right near the door. You couldn't see it with your eyes, but the infrared picked it up. After making sure they're alone, they set up their ghost hunting tools, eager to test the stories. But while they start their search, they don't realize that something strange is already caught on tape. Something that would later give them chills. If anyone starts feeling anything strange, say it out loud. Don't keep it to yourself, Jake says. It might be important. Unaware of the unexplained noises captured by their equipment, the group begins asking questions, hoping to make contact through a device placed by the door. I've got something on the floor here in the doorway, Liam says. If you can, come near it and try to touch it. Use your energy and come forward. Other than a sudden flicker of light, nothing happens with the device, and the room stays eerily quiet. After a while, they decide to try a different tool, hoping for a breakthrough. "Can you move my voice?" Jake asks into the spirit box. At first, just random sounds and static. But then something clear. "Did you say sit down?" Matt asks, hearing the faint voice. They get more specific answers, making it hard to write it off as coincidence. "It said my name," Simon says quietly. "That's not just chance." Nervous but curious, they stop using the spirit box and try to calm down. The tension is thick, each person thinking over what just happened. Suddenly, things get even more intense. "Let's take it easy," Liam says. "We should walk around and see if we notice anything. Keep your flashlights on." The place always felt a bit off. "You told me to sit down, then made me feel like I was burning," Jake says, shaken. "It was like heat under the floor." Before anyone could react, Liam was slammed down hard to the ground. Panic spread fast as Liam struggled to get up, breathless and shaking with fear. At first, the others thought it was a joke, but Liam was serious. He wanted to leave right away. "Stay calm, no panicking," Jake said firmly. They grabbed their gear and hurried out, keeping their lights on, moving quickly but carefully. Once back at the car, they all exhaled heavily but said nothing. The heaviness of the night's events hung between them, leaving more questions than answers. Jake knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't be returning to Greenfield Manor again. What happened there that night, the terrifying experience that shook them all deeply, would probably never be fully understood. It made them wonder if what pushed Liam was really something supernatural hiding in the dark corners of the abandoned building. But maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. After all, it's the unknown that keeps us cautious.